First, a shout out to people who suggested this case. Firstly, my cat's name is Morris. I love that name, by the way. And Dragon Lily, also a cool name. Anyway, on with the video. Albert Fish was an American serial killer, once described as, quote, the most vicious child slayer in criminal history. And, despite almost 90 years having passed since his death, I believe that he's still a strong contender for this horrific title. The reason for this is that Fish targeted young children who he raped, murdered, and apparently ate. Fish is known to have committed 3 murders, being executed for one of these, but is suspected of killing many more. He was also a sexual masochist, inserting needles into his own genitals for sexual pleasure. There are so many levels of depravity to Albert Fish, which earned him several nicknames, including the Werewolf of Wisteria, the Brooklyn Vampire, the Boogeyman, and the Grey Man. Welcome to Evil Among Us. Hamilton Howard Fish, who throughout his life wished to be known as Albert, was born on May the 19th, 1870, in Washington, D.C., to Randall and Ellen Fish. The dynamic in Fish's household was strange from the start, with his father being 75 years old at his birth, 43 years older than his mother, who was 32. Fish's mother Ellen had visual and auditory hallucinations and was likely suffering from schizophrenia, whilst his uncle was diagnosed with, quote, mania, so likely bipolar disorder, and spent time in a mental institution. One of his brothers was also diagnosed with, quote, mental affliction. In 1875, when Fish was 5 years old, his father, Randall, died of a heart attack, and his mother, Ellen, due to suffering from financial hardship, placed him in St. John's Orphanage, where he stayed for the next 5 years. During this time, Fish reported to have been physically abused on a regular basis, receiving beatings, which he realised he found sexually gratifying. So instead of avoiding wrongdoing, he would break the rules in order to be in these situations to get his kicks. Fish also implied that he saw boys abusing other boys and the custodians harming the children in various ways, both physically and likely sexually in both cases. In 1880, Ellen was able to secure a job and so took Fish out of the orphanage, but by this point, the damage was done. So you have indicators of Fish likely having a genetic predisposition towards mental illness, being raised in an environment where he was likely exposed to bizarre and unstable behaviour, who, at a young age, was subjected to physical violence and witnessed the same, which he saw was a way to get power over others, as well as sexual gratification. Lastly, it's clear he had a propensity towards exploring deviant sexual behaviours and practices. This combination resulted in Fish, from the moment he left the orphanage in 1880 at the age of just 10 years old, devoting his life to absolute depravity and the abuse of others. As an aside, I want to say that human sexual behaviour is obviously on a very wide spectrum, with people getting gratification from a variety of different acts and stimulus. Most of these fit within a list, albeit quite a long list. However, some people move outside of this, quote, normal spectrum and begin to be drawn to things that are risky and often illegal. For example, those who begin to watch material depicting bestiality, so sexual contact with animals and people. It appears that these people aren't attracted to animals, but it's more the fact that what they're watching is wrong, which gives them a thrill and leads to the gratification. Without intervention, these people keep searching for more and more extreme material and experiences to get the same high again. Albert Fish appears to have been at this stage, i.e. off the scale of normal, at the age of only 10 years old, so you can imagine how bad his pursuit of ever more grotesque acts to gain sexual gratification got over the next 50 years. It began with him developing sexual arousal to the practice of drinking urine and eating human feces when he was only 12 years old, which he was introduced to by a boy of the same age he began a sexual relationship with. Fish would also engage in voyeurism, going to public bathhouses where he would see young boys undress. In 1890, Fish moved to New York City and began working as a male prostitute. He also began to molest children, specifically small boys. Fish quickly developed a specific typology of victim, with him targeting those who had learning disabilities or African-American children, because he believed that these individuals would be less likely to tell the authorities and be less likely to be believed. Fish would lure them to his house, torture them for hours, often with a paddle covered in nails, rape them, and initially release the children alive. In 1898, Albert Fish married a woman called Anna Mary Hoffman. This was an arranged marriage, and I have no doubt set up to try and offset the rumours that would inevitably have been swirling around about his lifestyle. However, this marriage ended in 1917 when Anna ran off with another man, leaving Fish alone with their 6 children. During the marriage, and after Anna had left, he got his children to beat him on the bottom with the paddle covered in nails, which he used on other children, until he bled. He'd also taken to inserting needles into his body, specifically in his groin area. As another form of masochism, Fish would put wool doused in lighter fluid into his anus, which he would then light. Also around this time, Fish showed signs of mental illness, specifically schizophrenia, including believing that he was communicating with John the Apostle. On another occasion, one of Fish's sons describes an incident in 1922 when his father climbed the hills of Westchester, threw up his hands to the sky, and began screaming, quote, "I am Christ." Growing up in this household must have been absolutely hellish. In the early stages of the marriage, Fish did come to the attention of the authorities when, in 1902, aged 32, he was arrested, convicted, and incarcerated for larceny, being sent to Sing Sing prison, where he would be executed years later. However, as the marriage progressed, Fish's external activities were becoming more serious. Specifically, Fish later claimed that, in 1910, aged 40, he met a 19-year-old intellectually disabled man called Thomas Keeden whilst working in Wilmington in Delaware, and the pair began a sadomasochistic relationship. At some point, Fish lured Thomas into a farmhouse and claimed that he tortured him for 2 weeks, culminating in him cutting his penis in half. Fish later stated with regards to this act, quote, "I shall never forget his screams or the look he gave me." Fish claimed he intended to kill Thomas, but decided against it, so dressed the wound, gave him $10, and then, quote, "took the first train I could get home, never heard what became of him or tried to find out." In addition, Fish claimed that in 1919 he stabbed a mentally disabled child in Georgetown, Washington, D.C. On July the 11th, 1924, Fish found 8-year-old Beatrix Keel playing alone on her parents' Staten Island farm. He offered her money to come and help him look for rhubarb in the neighbouring fields. She was about to leave the farm with him when her mother came out and chased Fish away. Albert Fish also claimed to have tried to lure a neighbourhood child called Cyril Quinn and his friend into his apartment on the pretext of eating sandwiches. Apparently, when these children were wrestling on his bed, they dislodged the mattress, and upon finding a knife, small hacksaw, and meat cleaver, implements Fish called, quote, "implements of hell," they ran away. Eventually, Fish escalated to killing small children and mutilating their bodies. In chronological order, Albert Fish's first likely victim was 9-year-old Francis McDonnell, who failed to return home after playing catch with his friends in Port Richmond, Staten Island, on July the 12th, 1924. A search was organised, and Francis's body was found suspended from a tree in a wooded area close to his home. He'd been tortured, as shown by numerous cuts to his legs and abdomen, with his flesh around his left hamstring being completely removed. Francis had also been sexually assaulted and finally strangled with his own suspenders before being strung up from a tree where he was found. Other children who'd been playing with Francis told the police they'd seen an elderly man with a grey moustache walking around, mumbling to himself and making strange gestures with his hands. This suspect became known as, quote, "the Grey Man." It was only when arrested years later for a separate crime that the Grey Man was identified as being Albert Fish. On February the 11th, 1927, 4-year-old Billy Gaffney was playing with his friends, 2 brothers who were 3 and 12 years old, in a hallway of a Brooklyn apartment. The 12-year-old went into his apartment, and when he came back into the hallway, both younger boys had disappeared. The 3-year-old was later found on the roof of the apartment, but Billy was nowhere to be found, and the 3-year-old said, quote, "the boogeyman took him." A worker on a tram said that he saw a man with a young boy who matched Billy's description. The boy was crying for his mother and was dragged off the tram by the man. Police later identified the boy as being Billy, and the worker later identified Albert Fish as being the man after seeing a picture of him. Billy's body was never recovered, so what happened to him can only be taken from Fish's confession, which he dictated to his attorney after his arrest years later. I'll read out the confession, but please note, it's explicit, and if it's not obvious from the context, monkey refers to Billy's penis, and its peewees his testicles. So Fish stated, quote, "I brought him to the Riker Avenue dumps. There's a house that stands alone, not far from where I took him. I took the G-boy there, stripped him naked, and tied his hands and feet, and gagged him with a piece of dirty rag I picked out of the dump. Then I burned his clothes, threw his shoes in the dump. Then I walked back and took a trolley to 59th Street at 2 a.m. and walked home from there. Next day, about 2 p.m., I took tools, a good heavy cat of nine tails, homemade, short handle, cut one of my belts in half, slit these halves into 6 strips about 8 inches long. I whipped his bare behind till the blood ran from his legs. I cut off his ears, nose, slit his mouth from ear to ear, gouged out his eyes. He was dead then. I stuck the knife in his belly and held my mouth to his body and drank his blood. I picked up 4 old potato sacks and gathered a pile of stones. Then I cut him up. I had a grip with me. I put his nose, ears, and a few slices of his belly in the grip. Then I cut him through the middle of his body, just below his belly button. Then through his legs, about 2 inches below his behind. I put this in my grip with a lot of paper. I cut off the head, feet, arms, hands, and the legs below the knee. This I put in sacks, weighed with stones, tied the ends, and threw them into the pools of slimy water you'll see all along the road go to North Beach. Water is 3 to 4 feet deep. They sank at once. I came home with my meat. I had the front of his body I liked best, his monkey and peewees and a nice little fat behind to roast in the oven and eat. I made a stew out of his ears, nose, piece of his face and belly. I put onions, carrots, turnips, celery, salt and pepper. It was good. Then I split the cheeks of his behind open, cut off his monkey and peewees, and washed them first. I put strips of bacon on each cheek of his behind and put it in the oven. Then I picked 4 onions, and when the meat had roasted about a quarter of an hour, I poured about a pint of water over it for gravy and put in the onions. At frequent intervals, I basted his behind with a wooden spoon so the meat would be nice and juicy. In about 2 hours, it was nice and brown, cooked through. I never ate any roast turkey that tasted half as good as his sweet, fat little behind did. I ate every bit of the meat in about 4 days. His little monkey was as sweet as a nut, but his peewees I could not chew. Threw them in the toilet. As Billy's remains were never found, none of Fish's claims could actually be verified. On May the 25th, 1928, Albert Fish saw a classified advert in the Sunday edition of the New York World that read, quote, "Young man, 18, wishes position in country, Edward Budd, 406 West 15th Street." 3 days later, Fish, on the 28th of May 1928, travelled to the Budd family residence and claimed to be a farmer called Frank Howard, who could hire Edward and a friend of his. Fish later stated that his intention was to abduct and mutilate Edward, then leave him to bleed to death. Fish left saying he would send for the boys in the next few days, but this didn't happen. He sent a handwritten note to the Budd family apologising and stating that he would soon return. When Fish did return, on the 3rd of June 1928, the family invited him in for lunch, and during this visit, he spotted Edward's younger sister, Grace, who was just 10 years old. Fish stated that he would take Edward and his friend on at the farm, but first he was going to a birthday party and asked if Grace would like to come. The family saw no issue with this genial, 58-year-old, grey-haired man that was apparently going to help them get out of poverty, so they made a fatal mistake. They agreed. Grace then left with Fish, and that was the last time she was seen alive. Fish then took Grace, boarded a train, and eventually ended up taking her to an abandoned building where, unfortunately, her life ended in horrific fashion. When Grace did not return that evening, her family called the police. However, the investigation was hampered because Frank Howard, a farmer from New York, simply didn't exist. As with many serial killers, Fish was undoing what is needed to brag and gain attention for his despicable behaviour. It was in November 1934, so 6 years after the abduction of Grace, that Albert Fish showed his hand. And he did this via an anonymous letter that he sent to the Budd household. This letter is really strange and rambling and concludes with what Fish stated he did with Grace. I've corrected some of the grammatical errors to make it easier to read and wish to read the letter in full for a specific reason, so keep in mind the theme of the letter and the absence of religious overtones. This will be important later. So Fish wrote, quote, "My dear Mrs. Budd, in 1894 a friend of mine shipped as a deckhand on the steamer Tacoma, Captain John Davis. They sailed from San Francisco to Hong Kong, China. On arriving there, he and 2 others went ashore and got drunk. When they returned, the boat was gone. At that time, there was a famine in China. Meat of any kind was $1 to $3 a pound. So great was the suffering amongst the very poor that all children under 12 were sold to the butchers to be cut up and sold for food in order to keep others from starving. A boy or girl under 14 was not safe in the street. You could go into any shop and ask for steak, chops, or stew meat. Past the naked body of a boy or girl would be brought out and just what you wanted cut from it. A boy or girl's behind which the sweetest part of the body and sold as veal cutlet brought the highest price. John stayed there so long, he acquired a taste for human flesh. On his return to New York, he stole 2 boys, one 7, one 11, took them to his home, stripped them naked, tied them in a closet, then burned everything they had on. Several times every day and night, he spanked them, tortured them, to make their meat good and tender. First he killed the 11-year-old boy because he had the fattest ass and of course the most meat on it. Every part of his body was cooked and eaten, except head, bones and guts. He was roasted in the oven, all of his ass, boiled, broiled, fried, stewed. The little boy was next, went the same way. At that time, I was living at 409 East 101st Street, rear, right side. He told me so often how good human flesh was, I made up my mind to taste it. On Sunday, June the 3rd, 1928, I called on you at 406 West 15th Street, bought you pot cheese, strawberries. We had lunch. Grace sat in my lap and kissed me. I made up my mind to eat her, on the pretense of taking her to a party. You said yes, she could go. I took her to an empty house in Westchester I'd already picked out. When we got there, I told her to remain outside. She picked wildflowers. I went upstairs and stripped all my clothes off. I knew if I did not, I would get blood on them. When all was ready, I went to the window and called her. Then I hid in a closet until she was in the room. When she saw me all naked, she began to cry and tried to run downstairs. I grabbed her and she said she would tell her mama. First I stripped her naked. How she did kick, bite and scratch. I choked her to death, then cut her in small pieces so I could take my meat to my rooms, cook and eat it. How sweet and tender her little ass was roasted in the oven. It took me 9 days to eat her entire body. I did not fuck her though. I could have had I wished. She died a virgin. However, when he was eventually caught, Fish fluctuated between claiming he had not raped Grace and admitting he had done this very thing. It was the note that Fish sent to the Budd family that led to his undoing. This letter had the logo of the New York Private Chauffeurs Benevolent Association emblazoned on it. The police went to the organization and spoke to a janitor who it was determined had owned this stationery, but he stated he'd taken it to his former home, a room at 200 East 52nd Street, and he'd left it there when he moved out. This room had then been rented out to Albert Fish. Police went and waited outside the apartment door and waited for Fish to return. He initially agreed to go willingly, but then pulled out a razor and tried to attack the officers. He was quickly subdued and taken into custody. He quickly confessed to killing Grace Budd and being the author of the note sent to the family many years after her abduction. Fish directed the police back to the property where he'd murdered Grace, and, when looking in the grounds, they recovered her skull, but almost nothing else of her remains. To cement their case further, Edward Budd, Grace's brother, was driven to identify Fish face to face. When Edward saw Fish, he launched himself at him, screaming, quote, "You old bastard, dirty son of a bitch." Fish showed no emotion, which prompted Edward to state, "Don't you know me?" Fish answered politely, quote, "Yes, you're Mr. Budd." It should be noted that Grace Budd's death was the only one that Fish was ever tried for. He confessed to the 2 other crimes later and did not go to trial, likely because of the outcome of the hearings related to Grace's murder. Albert Fish's trial for Grace Budd's murder began on March the 11th, 1935, in White Plains, New York. Fish pleaded not guilty to murder by reason of insanity, claiming that he believed that God had told him to kill Grace. The utter depravity of Fish was laid bare at his trial, as psychiatrists inventoried his personality and identified a long list of sexual proclivities, which included, and it is a long list, sadism, so taking pleasure in other people's pain or humiliation, masochism, taking pleasure in one's own pain or humiliation, paedophilia, necrophilia, sexual arousal from acts involving urine, eating feces, whipping, sexual arousal from a sight of blood, female genital mutilation, cannibalism, arousal from penetrating the skin of himself and others with sharp objects, for example pins and knives, watching others engage in sexual or intimate acts, as well as exhibitionism. An example of the level of deviancy came when an X-ray was shown of Fish's pelvic area, which showed more than 24 needles he'd inserted into his genital area and his perineum, so the bit between the scrotum and the anus, over the years. One of the psychiatrists who assessed Fish stated he was, quote, "a psychiatric phenomenon due to the number of sexual abnormalities that he developed." Fish was assessed as having a, quote, "psychopathic personality without a psychosis." So this means that he was a psychopath and so had these traits such as a lack of empathy or conscience, but this was not rooted in delusional thinking. For what I know of this case, I tend to agree with this, as some of Fish's actions blow his own defence apart. Specifically, the note I read out, which was sent to Mrs. Budd, made no mention of any religious motivation to his crimes. It was clearly a note with a particular purpose, to gain further sexual gratification from causing distress to others. It should be noted that Fish had done this throughout his life, sending obscene, sexually explicit letters to women who posted classified ads in the papers, with him outlining what he wanted to do to them and what he wanted them to do to him. Whilst I have no doubt that Albert Fish had serious mental health problems, including apparently declaring himself Jesus Christ on one occasion, it's clear that he was in his right mind when he went to the Budd residence and was able to present himself as a genial, inoffensive old man, hence why the family allowed Grace to go off with him. There's no indication, at that point, that he was suffering from a psychotic episode, i.e. a break from reality. However, that is just my take. To counter, the defense tried to highlight Fish's apparent obsession with biblical texts and teachings. None of the jurors doubted that Albert Fish was insane, but it appears, as disclosed by one juror later, they thought he should be executed anyway, given the level of his depravity. As a result, Albert Fish was found guilty of the murder of Grace Budd and sentenced to die in the electric chair, nicknamed, quote, Old Sparky. In March 1935, Albert Fish arrived at Sing Sing prison in New York to await his execution. He never showed any remorse for his crimes. At just after 11 p.m. on Thursday the 16th of January 1936, Albert Fish stepped into the death chamber at Sing Sing prison and was strapped to the electric chair. It's rumoured that he helped place the electrodes on his body. How true this is, I'm unsure. Fish's last words were apparently, quote, "I don't even know why I'm here." It apparently took 2 jolts of electricity to kill Fish, which led to a rumour that the needles he put in his body had short-circuited the system. There's no evidence this is true. Regardless, the execution was ultimately successful, and Albert Fish died in approximately 3 minutes. His body was buried in the grounds of Sing Sing prison. Albert Fish claimed to have killed over 100 people, but authorities believe he killed closer to 10 children. Regardless, it's apparent that he killed more children than we know about. I've been able to find some information on a couple of the murders he suspects of committing. The first is of Yetta Abramovich. Yetta was born in Russia, and by the time of her death, on May the 14th, 1927, was 12 years old, living with her family in New York. On this day, she was strangled and beaten on the roof of a 5-story apartment house at 1013 Simpson Street. She died later in hospital. I've looked into it, but I cannot find specific information about why Albert Fish is suspected in this case, aside from noting that apparently a tall young man was seen in the area and that he tried to lure children off the street before he met Yetta. However, Fish was 57 at this point, so I'm unsure why he's connected. Also, there was no mutilation, which seems to have been his hallmark. The second murder is that of 16-year-old Mary Ellen O'Connor, who was murdered on February the 15th, 1932, with her mutilated body being found in a wooded area in Far Rockaway in Queens. Albert Fish is suspected as, at the time of her murder, he had a job painting houses a short distance away. I think it's important to not get swept up in the lore that's created around various serial killers for one quite important reason. Most of them are pathological liars. This is sort of understandable to some extent, as in order to gain access to victims and get away with their crimes, they're often skilled manipulators and have a disturbing ability to deceive others. However, it muddles the waters when trying to get a handle on these people. With regards to Albert Fish, he appears to fit this mold, with him being described as a pathological liar in texts I've read, with him changing elements of his narrative as time progressed. He also claimed to have killed 100 people, which is considered unlikely, and was likely claimed to try and increase his level of notoriety. His case reminds me of that of Otis Sewell, who claimed that between the 1960s and 1980s, he killed 600 people, whilst his accomplice, Henry Lee Lucas, claimed to have killed a further 100 on top of that. They were no doubt killers who ended the lives of many, but many of their claims have been disproven. Also, it's clear that Fish got a sick kick out of causing others disgust, including writing sexually explicit messages to women who saw in the classified ads. Much of what we know about Fish's crimes came from his own confessions, with little evidence to back it up. So how much of it can we believe? In particular, I have some skepticism about his claim of being a cannibal. When you read the notes regarding his consumption of Grace Budd and Billy Gaffney, they seem extremely melodramatic, trying to make an already horrific situation even more salacious. For example, the preamble in his letter to Grace's mother about famine in China is completely unrelated to what he goes on to talk about. Also, parts of his letter were clearly determined to be nonsense. Yes, there have been famines in China, but not one where children under the age of 12 were sold to butchers, and you could walk into these establishments and they'd wheel out the dead body of a child and you could take pieces of meat from them. Instead, I read that some detectives felt that he was trying to set up a defense of insanity in order to escape the electric chair, which obviously didn't work. His case is also different to that of Issei Sagawa and Richard Chase, where horrific evidence was recovered to corroborate their cannibalistic crimes. It's clear that, as outlined in court, Fish had a sexual arousal to the concept of cannibalism. Whether he followed through with this is ultimately unclear. Potentially there's truth in his confessions, but this is buried under a lattice of lies, or perhaps these were just the ramblings of an unsound mind. We will never know. However, even discounting the cannibalistic element, it's clear that Albert Fish was an extremely dangerous and predatory paedophile whose whole life was devoted to utter depravity in order for him to get his sexual kicks. Regardless of what he did to these victims' bodies post-mortem, I have little doubt their final moments were horrific, with him using their bodies to live out his fantasies revolving around sex, torture, and pain. Even with this profile, I would agree that he was one of the most vicious child slayers in history. I'm no doubt Albert Fish killed many more children than we know about, and his true number of victims will likely never be known. This case is truly sickening, and I'm sure you'll agree that this man, Jordan Monahan, is pure evil. The reason for this is that Monaghan is a British serial killer who ended the lives of 2 of his 3 children between 2013 and 2016. One of them was just 28 days old. Monaghan also unsuccessfully tried to do the same to his 3rd child on 2 occasions. Whilst under investigation for these offences, Monaghan began a relationship with a woman, Evie Adams, who he abused and eventually killed in 2019 by poisoning her. All the while, Monaghan never showed any remorse for his crimes and continued to live his life as normal until he was finally revealed to be the monster that he was. Welcome to Evil Among Us. There's little information about Jordan Monaghan's early life, but it appears he was born in 1991, either in or around the town of Blackburn in the county of Lancashire, UK, approximately 20 miles northwest of Manchester. While still a teenager, Monaghan began a relationship with a girl of the same age, called Laura Gray, and in November 2008, so when he was around 17 years old, Monaghan and Laura became engaged. Almost exactly 3 years later, on November the 17th, 2011, the pair welcomed their first child into the world, Logan, a happy and healthy baby boy. However, there were already issues in the relationship due to Monaghan's chronic gambling addiction, with him racking up thousands of pounds of debt on multiple credit cards and blowing all of his wages as soon as he received them. This meant the family were in significant financial difficulty, bills were unpaid, and they were in dire straits. On the 23rd of September 2012, the situation came to a head, and Laura, by now pregnant with the pair's 2nd child, told Monaghan the relationship was over. After having this conversation, Laura went on a shopping trip and then received a call from Monaghan saying that Logan had been rushed to hospital due to a suspected paracetamol overdose due to him finding Logan playing next to a pack which had some tablets missing. Laura, beside herself with worry, rushed to the hospital to be at Logan's bedside. However, when she got to the hospital, it transpired that no drugs were found in Logan's system. It had been a false alarm. Laura felt that Monaghan had just been overly cautious due to his love for their son, and this incident and his response appeared to pave over the cracks in the relationship temporarily. However, this incident was the beginning of a sick and twisted game played by Monaghan, using his own children like chess pieces in order to manipulate Laura into staying with him, but also, I believe, punishing her for daring to suggest ending the relationship. The pair welcomed their 2nd child, Ruby, on December the 8th, 2012. Laura later said that the family had the, quote, best Christmas ever after Ruby was born, and, quote, I felt like the luckiest mum in the world with my own little family. It was all I'd ever wanted. I was determined to give my children everything I never had. However, tensions continue within the relationship, with Monaghan continuing to gamble, blowing all the money he earned, whilst racking up debts and contributing nothing to the household. This led to Laura again threatening to end the relationship, and it seems that Monaghan felt he needed to escalate his behaviour to create a situation where Laura would be so utterly devastated that her focus would be redirected and she would forget about ending the relationship and would ultimately look to him for support. So he decided to murder the children. On the 28th of December 2012, Ruby, aged 20 days old, was taken to hospital due to difficulty breathing. She was diagnosed as suffering from bronchitis and stayed in hospital until the 31st of December 2012, when she was allowed home. Literally, just a few hours later, in the early hours of January the 1st, 2013, Laura was woken up by Monaghan, who said that Ruby had stopped breathing. Laura stated, quote, I ran downstairs and I could see, the moment I looked at her, that she was gone. Laura was unfortunately correct. An ambulance was called, but there was nothing that could be done. And so, baby Ruby, aged just 28 days old, was pronounced dead at 2:45 a.m. The cause of death was determined to have been due to bronchitis. However, the truth is that Monaghan had smothered Ruby in her Moses basket whilst Laura was asleep. Monaghan had clearly ensured that she was dead before waking Laura, meaning that his pathetic and disgusting pantomime of performing CPR on his daughter was just a performance, likely to make him seem like a father desperately trying to save his daughter's life rather than the one who had taken it. Laura fell to pieces after the death of her daughter and relied heavily on Monaghan to get through this grief, with him taking care of the funeral arrangements and generally being her rock. Of course, the focus became on trying to come to terms with the death of their daughter, and the issues in the relationship seemed to evaporate. Laura later stated, quote, "He just carried on, but again, I just thought that he was being strong for me. I didn't suspect a thing. We focused on Logan because he was all we had left. Jordan had a really close relationship with his son." However, again the same pattern re-emerged, and Monaghan continued to gamble, resulting in tensions in the relationship. On the 16th of August 2013, Laura again had had enough of Monaghan and told him the relationship was over. The next day, the 17th of August 2013, Monaghan said he wanted to take their son Logan, now aged 21 months, swimming. Monaghan took Logan to Waves Water Fun Centre in Blackburn, but neither of them actually went swimming. In the changing rooms, Monaghan suffocated Logan. Then, in an act of ultimate depravity, he secured his son's dead body into his buggy, covered it with a rain cover, and wheeled it home. Claimed that Logan was asleep and that Laura should wake him up before he went out to get pizza. Laura said that as soon as she lifted the rain cover, she knew Logan was dead. She called Monaghan in a frantic state, and he rushed home and again made a show of performing CPR on the child he had murdered. However, Logan was beyond saving and was pronounced dead. His cause of death was determined to be inconclusive. Laura was so distraught that she had to be admitted to a psychiatric facility. However, Monaghan came to visit her every day, and she leaned on him exclusively to try and get through a parent's worst nightmare. The support led them to rekindle their relationship, and again, all his financial recklessness was forgotten. Sickeningly, after the death of Logan, Monaghan gave at least one interview to the press in which he stated, quote, "It's been like a bad dream, and we expect to wake up at any moment. You never get over losing a child, but we were just starting to move on and then Logan dies. You always expect your children to outlive you and don't think you'll have to plan their funeral, but we had to do it twice in 8 months. It's heartbreaking." He also complained that police were treating him and Laura like criminals. The couple's third child, a daughter, was born in May 2016. It appears that this child, who cannot be named for legal reasons, was again harmed by Monaghan, but thankfully survived despite his best efforts. Specifically, at the girl's christening on the 18th of September 2016, Laura caught Monaghan using a fruit machine, and this led to an argument where she said she would leave him. On the 27th of September 2016, Monaghan was alone with his daughter when he shouted to Laura that she'd stop breathing. An ambulance was called, but the child appeared to recover on their own. On the 2nd of October 2016, their daughter again suffered another apparent respiratory episode whilst alone with Monaghan. She spent 9 days recovering, but no cause for her sudden illness was found in the hospital. Later, it was proven that Monaghan had suffocated his daughter on each of these occasions, attempting to murder her. After this last incident, the relationship between Laura and Monaghan broke down permanently, and I've read alternatively that Laura was given full custody of their third child, but also read that they were taken into care. Either way, Monaghan had no access to his daughter, inevitably saving her life. The deaths of 2 children and the serious illness of another within the same household led to serious concerns amongst professionals, but it was not until January 2018, almost 5 years after the children's deaths, that investigations between the police and medical professionals determined the most likely cause of these incidents was deliberate obstruction of the children's airways. It was then not until April the 13th, 2018, that Jordan Monaghan was arrested on suspicion of murder and attempted murder. This clip shows part of the interview, specifically related to the death of Logan.
You're under arrest, obviously, on suspicion of the attempt murder of Logan. That's for an instance on the 27th of the 7th, 2013. That's attempt murder on the 17th of the 8th, 2013. Okay?
Yeah.
It's as it was before. You're responsible for either of those 2 offences?
No.
But he was away when you left Waves?
It was, no. Not when I left.
He wasn't awake. When did he fall asleep?
Just as we was coming out of Wales.
The police didn't have enough evidence to charge Monaghan, and he was released on bail. However, it appears they kept a close eye on him. This included reaching out to women that he tried to start relationships with, informing them that he was a dangerous man. Unfortunately, this did not stop Monaghan from forming a relationship with a woman called Evie Adams in early 2018, when she was just 22 years old. Evie Adams did not have the best start in life, being removed from an abusive household with her brother when she was young, with both children being the victims of violence and neglect. When she was around 7 years old, the fostering agency called Yvonne Adams and asked if she and her husband Bernard would take the children, to which they agreed. And the pair never left, being loved by Bernard and Yvonne as if they were their own children. And 3 years after first arriving, they were both adopted. At the age of 16 years old, Evie took their surname, cementing her place as their daughter. Around the same time, Evie moved out and began a relationship with her first serious boyfriend, Nathan. And when Evie was around 19 years old, she became pregnant with her first child, a daughter. Unfortunately, she suffered postnatal depression after the birth, and this put a strain on her relationship with Nathan, and they separated, but they would co-parent their daughter, with her spending certain days with her father at his property. However, it appears that Evie was lonely and didn't wish to raise her daughter alone, and she began looking online for a new partner. In early 2018, Evie and Jordan Monaghan met through Tinder and began a relationship. Monaghan sought to control and isolate Evie almost immediately, telling her not to inform people that the pair were together, with her family only finding out because they heard local gossip about the fact he'd been seen at her house. Her parents and friends were concerned, as Monaghan was believed, within the local community, correctly, to be a child murderer, and they begged Evie to end the relationship, but tragically, she dismissed their concerns. Monaghan started to sever connections that Evie had with support, including her friends and also her former partner Nathan, with him threatening to burn down his house if he carried on contacting Evie, and that he didn't care if the pair's daughter was in the property when this happened. However, Evie quickly fell under his spell, taken in by Monaghan's charm, being made to feel special and no longer alone. Monaghan subtly chipped away at Evie's self-esteem, reminding her that she'd been abused as a child and therefore somehow damaged, and that she would not be able to find anyone else if they were not together. The police and social services entered the scene almost immediately, with the police warning Evie the danger she and her daughter were in, as well as taking her to a place of safety. Social services basically gave Evie a choice of being with Monaghan or having her daughter removed from her care, and she initially appeared to agree to stop seeing him, and a restraining order was imposed in May 2018, prohibiting Monaghan from having contact with Evie. However, Monaghan ignored this order, and the pair kept having contact, leading to him breaching the order repeatedly, including in June 2018, December 2018, and March 2019. He appeared in front of the courts for each of these breaches, and eventually went to prison for 12 weeks after the last breach. However, it's clear that he had no intention of relinquishing control over Evie. Due to the continued contact between the pair, in early 2019, Evie lost custody of her daughter, with the child being removed due to concerns that Monaghan would harm or kill them. Evie was devastated, and while she still had regular supervised contact with her daughter, it clearly wasn't the same. By mid-2019, it appears Evie was looking for a way out of the relationship with Monaghan and wanted to make changes so that she could have her daughter returned to her care. With the help of services, Evie was able to get a place in a women's refuge in Kendal, approximately 50 miles away. The locations of women's refuges are closely guarded secrets for obvious reasons, as these women are often escaping from men who, if they could track them down, would likely kill them. However, Monaghan found Evie's location quickly, likely due to tracking her phone, and she contacts her friend telling her that Monaghan was following her around everywhere she went. She was advised to call the police, but she didn't want to get Monaghan into further trouble. However, despite all attempts, Monaghan would find a way to continue to slither his way back into Evie's life. By October 2019, the pair were back in a relationship, but it appears that Evie was fighting back, showing defiance of Monaghan's control, which led to more frequent arguments. The tipping point appears to have come over the weekend of the 11th to the 13th of October 2019, when Monaghan, Evie and some friends went to stay in a caravan in Blackpool. Monaghan didn't hide the person he was. He was rude, aggressive, intimidating, and eventually smashed up the caravan they were all staying in. When they returned back to Blackburn on the 14th of October 2019, Evie appears to have told Monaghan that the relationship was over, as she began to look for a new place to live, away from him. However, Monaghan had no intention of allowing this to happen, and, on the same day, he joined a WhatsApp group titled, quote, UK Tablets, and sent a message to buy drugs saying, quote, who's got tramadol, and asking others for, quote, pregabs and blues, meaning diazepam and pregabalin. Tramadol is a strong painkiller, whilst diazepam and pregabalin are medications used for a variety of conditions, but when taken with tramadol can cause drowsiness, sedation, and slow breathing and heart rate, potentially resulting in death. Within days, Evie's flat hunting had been placed on hold. She was reportedly being extremely unwell. It appears that Monaghan was poisoning Evie, giving her high doses of a combination of these drugs, which has a severe and rapid impact on her body. By October the 22nd, 2019, Evie was delirious and suffering from abdominal pains. Her body was shutting down. Her breathing was also getting slower, along with her heart rate. In one of the last messages Evie sent to Monaghan on the 23rd of October 2019, she stated, quote, I feel like I'm dying. Unfortunately, she was correct, and her life was ebbing away, and it's horrific to think how scared she must have been, going from active and healthy to dying within the space of approximately 2 weeks and not knowing the reason why. On the 24th of October 2019, Evie Adams had extremely high levels of sedative in her system, was in significant pain, and was unable to walk. Monaghan then administered a fatal dose of tramadol, intended to kill her. He gave her a dosage equivalent to 20 50-milligram tramadol tablets. This dosage is approximately 3 times the amount that a doctor would usually ever prescribe of this powerful painkiller, and this, combined with the residual sedatives in her body, resulted in an overdose and her death at the age of just 23 years old. Whether Monaghan stood and watched Evie die is unclear, but it's apparent that he was taking steps to cover his tracks immediately. After administering this fatal dosage to Evie, he took her phone and went to work. He then sent himself a message from her phone, which read, quote, I've taken the drugs. I don't want to be here anymore. I don't want help. Clearly laying the groundwork to make her death look like a suicide. As with other people like Monaghan, they appear to have real difficulty in understanding how people would actually react in this situation. Because they lack normal human emotions, they act in a strange way, which actually raises suspicion. In the case of Monaghan, instead of dropping everything and running home to be with his partner, who would just text him saying she was going to kill herself, he finished his working day and texted her aunt, asking her to check up on Evie. Evie's aunt Julie went round there and found her niece dead in bed. Given the fact that a young woman had died suddenly, the police were called and began an investigation. But, whilst they were suspicious, they could not be sure Evie's death was suspicious. It was actually Monaghan's own arrogance and stupidity which raised concerns and led police to take a closer look at him. Specifically, a few weeks after her death, in November 2019, Monaghan told police that he'd found a suicide note. This was apparently hidden in a picture frame, which he'd found when he took the photo out to apparently place in Evie's coffin. This was considered very odd, as the note, which as a suicide note was clearly intended to be read, was put in a place where it could potentially have never been found, and it was just by chance that Monaghan had happened to open that one picture frame. Also, the handwriting did not match Evie's. An autopsy established that Evie's death was due to a fatal overdose, and Monaghan was interviewed on suspicion of killing her in both October 2019 and June 2020. He denied having anything to do with her death. Unfortunately, again, the police didn't have enough evidence to charge him, and so he was released on bail. Monaghan pretended to be the grieving boyfriend, including posting this disgusting post on Facebook. So, by 2020, Jordan Monaghan was on bail whilst the police investigated his potential involvement in the murders of 3 people. So, what did Monaghan do? He went back to his old lifestyle of gambling and drinking, and this disgusting clip from around October 2020, so a year after Evie's death, shows him apparently having the time of his life, filming himself singing along to the song Mr. Brightside by The Killers. Due to that being a copyrighted song, I can't play the sound, but you're not missing much. The breakthrough in this case came in late 2020 when the police were able to obtain Monaghan's phone, and this showed him buying the very drugs that Evie had overdosed on just before she started to become unwell. On the 17th of January 2021, the walls finally closed in on Monaghan, and he was arrested on suspicion of murdering Logan, Ruby, and Evie Adams, as well as 2 counts of attempting to murder his 3rd child. He continued to deny any involvement, and when confronted with the new evidence about searches on his phone of him trying to source drugs, he said they were for him. He was not believed, and on the 18th of January 2021, Monaghan was charged with all offences and remanded into custody to await his day in court. Jordan Monaghan pleaded not guilty to all offences and went to trial at Preston Crown Court. This trial lasted 10 weeks, and on December the 17th, 2021, the jury found him guilty of murdering Logan and Ruby by suffocating them and Evie Adams by administering a fatal dosage of medication. He was also found guilty of 2 counts of attempted murder against his 3rd child with Laura Gray by suffocating them. Later that same day, Monaghan stood before Mr. Justice Goose for sentencing. Justice Goose stated, quote, "It's difficult to imagine why you carried out these offences, but having listened to the evidence in this trial, I'm sure that you are an exceptionally controlling, selfish, and cruel man." He then sentenced him. For 3 counts of murder and 2 counts of attempted murder, Jordan Monaghan was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum tariff of 40 years. On the 29th of July 2022, this was increased to a minimum of 48 years when the Court of Appeal deemed the original sentence to be too lenient. Based on this, Monaghan will be around 77 years old before he's able to apply for parole, assuming he lives that long. Concerns have been raised to the media about the handling of this case by several different agencies, including medical professionals, and their lack of, quote, professional curiosity regarding the deaths of both Logan and Ruby, with their deaths not being treated as suspicious. I've also read about a serious case review being initiated at Blackburn Council, inevitably around safeguarding, and why the family was not scrutinised more closely when the children have repeated contact with medical professionals, and why consideration wasn't given to removing the children from the home. In addition, criticism has been levelled at the speed of the police investigation, with Monaghan not being charged with the murders of his own children until 8 years later, and 3 years after a review had established that his 2 children had likely been murdered by suffocation. In response, Detective Chief Superintendent Pauline Stables stated, quote, "The deaths of both Ruby and Logan were subject to review in 2018. We gathered all the information the previous investigation filed. It's really difficult. You've got a loss of evidence from previous investigations, because the deaths were treated or deemed to be natural causes. You've got medical evidence that's lost, CCTV, so it's really, really difficult to investigate historical crimes. Loss of evidence related to the suspicious death of 2 children. I'm not sure about you, but I find this explanation absolutely staggering. The glacial progression in this case and the lack of action by agencies meant that Jordan Monahan was free to murder another person, a vulnerable woman whose death has devastated her family and left a daughter without a mother. Monahan should have been safely behind bars a lot sooner, and lives would have been saved. Serious case reviews should result in a report, which can be accessed by the public, and I cannot find any. Potentially they are pending, and I'll likely do an update on this video if I can get hold of them, as they often contain a lot more information, including background regarding the offender. However, even without this information, I for one am struggling to understand how a man this dangerous was allowed to walk around free for so long, free to kill again. This is one of the most horrific cases I've covered, and in order to highlight why, we need to look at why Jordan Monahan committed these crimes. It should be pointed out that Monahan did not admit his culpability, and the trial established his guilt, but not his motivation. So this is just my analysis, but I'm very confident I'm on the mark. So, going back to the profile of domestic abusers, these individuals often have backgrounds of trauma themselves, which results in them having low self-esteem and issues with abandonment, and they're unable to cope with the end of a relationship and or being on their own, and so they look to control their partners, eroding their self-esteem and placing them in a position, often through fear, where they feel unable to leave. Control is obtained and maintained through a variety of tactics, including violence, threats of violence, emotional abuse, isolating behaviour, etc. If they feel their control is being defied, for example, if their victim tries to leave the relationship, they will implement whatever tactics to stop this, as well as punish them for daring to consider that they have any say in the coupling. So, that is the basic template, which I found is common amongst domestic abusers. But in the case of Monahan, there are additional factors I think need to be considered, in particular indicators of narcissism and psychopathy. Specifically, I think that Monahan is a man who is entirely self-centered. No one else matters but him and what he wants, and, in this case, remaining in a relationship. With regards to psychopathy, I think it's obvious that he has no empathy, no compassion for others, and is willing to harm anyone, even his own children, without any regret or remorse. So, together, you have a man who is emotionally dependent on relationships and is willing to do whatever it takes in order to remain in control in these situations, even if it involves harming and killing others to get his own way. This would explain why, whenever Laura Gray tried to end the relationship, he would not have this, as I looked for some way to ensure this would not occur. He figured that the best way to do this was to create some sort of emergency which would completely redirect Laura's attention away from concerns about his behaviour, and he decided on using the one thing most precious to her, but clearly of absolutely no consequence to him, their children. So he created situations where she was in a blind panic when the children were sick, and he would then ride on his white Charger, pretending to be supportive and caring, being her rock. However, he needed situations which would utterly devastate Laura, destroy her psychologically, make her look to him entirely for support, and give him further opportunities to act as the hero. In order to achieve this, he killed the children, knowing that this would cripple Laura and make her forget any intention to leave him, and give him opportunities to act as the hero, including CPR on children he knew to be already dead, and organising a funeral, etc. So, rather than taking steps to address the main issue which seemed to be causing issues in the relationship, his gambling, he thought it was a better idea to kill his own children. The absolute evil of this man is so profound, and I cannot get my head around how he could kill his own children, likely by placing his hand over their nose and mouth, watching and feeling their life ebbing away, abusing the ultimate trust that is placed in a parent by a child, and destroying the most precious gift that a person can receive in their life. These children were just pawns in his sick little game. He was no father, He's not even worthy of being referred to as a human being, in my opinion. I think there was also a form of punishment in his actions. It's sickening that he wheeled Logan home knowing he was dead, and they got Laura to lift the rain cover and see her son like that. I have no doubt Monahan was filled with glee, knowing the impact this would have on her, and he was likely thinking to himself, "So you think you can leave me? This is what happens when you try." Eventually, he formed a relationship with Evie Adams, a woman who had a history of trauma herself, who was struggling as a single mother, and who just wanted to be loved and supported. No doubt, Monahan presented himself as her saviour and manipulated her into believing that he was the answer to all of her problems. The one positive in this case, and I use that term loosely, is that Evie's daughter was removed from her care, and this is only because I have no doubt that Monahan would have harmed or killed this child eventually. However, in the absence of anyone else, he targeted Evie directly, and, when she wanted to end the relationship, he poisoned her. Initially, I think this was to incapacitate her, making her so ill that she was entirely under his control. Why he eventually killed her is unclear, but I think that Monahan knew he could not let her recover, that if she did, she would tell the police who was giving her the pills, and it would only be a matter of time before he was arrested. She was an inconvenience and needed to be eliminated. Why Evie took the pills is also a question that remains unanswered, but I think it's important to note that during the Blackpool trip in October 2019, one of her friends noticed Monahan giving her tablets out of a bottle. I think it's likely that Monahan had already got Evie hooked on medication as a form of control, and so she would be more likely to continue taking pills he gave her, potentially due to already being addicted to them. I want to say something in this case to try and offset some potential negative comments. People may say, why did Laura or Evie not know what was going on? Or why did they not take better care of their children, etc.? I really want to stress that unless you have been in this type of situation or seen it up close, it's difficult to put into words how insidious domestic abuse is, how these men are often skilled manipulators who can change people and make them act in ways that, looking back, they may be completely disgusted by. Even if you think both women potentially should or could have acted differently, I don't think that anything that either of them did meant that one should lose their life at the age of 23 years old and the other one had to spend the rest of her life mourning her two children. Nothing they did or didn't do meant they deserved that. So, please be respectful of these women. Do not lose focus that this monster, Jordan Monahan, is the ultimate cause of this. May he rot in prison and then, hopefully, in the depths of hell. On another note, I want to highlight support services if you need to talk to someone about domestic abuse. In the UK, a great place to start for advice and help, especially with escaping an abusive relationship, is called the National Domestic Abuse Helpline, 24 hours a day, on 0808 2000 24/7. Also, Women's Aid is an amazing organisation that offers advice and practical support, and they can be found at www.womensaid.org.uk. The website has lots of information, as well as a live chat function, which is active between 8 AM and 6 PM Monday to Friday, and 10 AM to 6 PM at the weekend. There's an option you can click on the website, which quickly takes you to a Google home screen if you need to hide what you're doing from your abuser. In the US, call the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence on 1-800-799-SAFE or visit www.thehotline.org. The advantage of this website is that if you double-click Escape, it takes you to a Google homepage, which will mean you can hide what you're doing if you're disturbed by your abuser. The link to both websites will be in the description. However, if you or someone you know is in immediate danger, then do not hesitate to call 999 or 911 or whatever the emergency service number is in your country. Ian Watkins had it all. Adoring fans due to the success of his band Lost Prophets, millions of pounds in the bank, and offers to play some of the biggest festivals around the world. However, Watkins was in fact two people. One, the talented musician, the other one of the most depraved paedophiles the UK has ever seen, who used his fame to abuse his fans and gain access to children. welcome to Evil Among Us. Ian Watkins was born on the 30th of July 1977 in Wales and met his future Lost Prophets bandmate Mike Lewis whilst they were still at school. Their love of music led to them forming their first band as teenagers, who used to play in Watkins' garage. After being in a number of bands, in 1997 Watkins, Lewis and several other musicians formed the rock band Lost Prophets, who made their live debut in 1997. The band initially only saw limited success in the South Wales scene, playing gigs at venues across Wales, including Newport. It was the release of their debut album The Fake Sound of Progress in 2000, which brought them to wider attention, and from there the band's fan base exploded, leading to Lost Prophets playing support for bands such as Linkin Park and Deftones, as well as headlining gigs of their own. Over the next 12 years, the band released 4 more records, sold 3.5 million albums worldwide, and played some of the biggest festivals in the world, including Glastonbury. They earned particular success in the UK with the songs Last Train Home and Rooftops. This next clip shows Watkins talking about the band's comeback after a hiatus in 2012.
Kind of weird because to us, we've never been away from ourselves. Americans forget that there are other countries out there. There's a whole world outside of America, you know. The last record didn't come out in America, but, you know, went platinum in the UK and we did, you know, tours, just toured it constantly, and it was like, and then on this new record, this is our first record on a major label in the UK, because all the other ones have been on in indie. It's kind of weird. It's not that, like, we'd forgotten or given up on America, because like 4 of the guys live in LA, you know what I mean, and married American girl, so they're like, we gotta tour America, and I'm like, well, you know, yeah, cool, but if not, you know what I mean, like, I love playing America, but I'm not gonna lose sleep over it, you know what I mean, it's kind of, but then...
However, there would be no comeback. By the point of this interview, Watkins was mere weeks away from being arrested for horrific crimes he had committed, including the sexual abuse of babies. What's even worse is that the police had known about these crimes for years and had had numerous opportunities to stop him. Concerns related to Watkins were reported as early as 2008, 4 years before his arrest. In December of that year, a former partner of Watkins called social services and said that he'd given their infant child cocaine and touched him inappropriately. This information was passed to South Wales Police, but was not acted upon. By this point, Watkins had already taken advantage of underage fans, including the previous year in 2007, when he'd abused a teenage girl who was a virgin. Watkins got her to dress as schoolgirl's outfit and videoed them having sex, orally, vaginally and anally. He asked her whether she enjoyed being his, quote, underage slut. He also urinated on her face and told her to drink it. In March 2010, information was passed to South Wales Police that Watkins was involved in child pornography and that he had stated that he wished to engage in sexual acts with children. In June 2010, information was again sent to South Wales Police claiming that Watkins was in possession of child pornography and had claimed to have molested a 4-year-old, and he was using social media platforms to groom underage boys and girls. Just 2 months later, in August 2010, South Wales Police received yet another report about Watkins, this time stating he forced young girls from the age of 14 to have sex with him after gigs and recorded the acts on his laptop. Watkins also claimed to have gone on social media, threatening the children that he abused, telling them that he'd get people to come round and, quote, sort them out if they told anyone. Watkins repeatedly boasted and bragged about his behaviour and how he wanted to escalate his offending. It's clear that he thought he was untouchable. In May 2011, this woman, Joanne Majlix, a former partner of Watkins, made a complaint about police inaction surrounding his behaviour. This clip shows part of an interview with her, where she describes her interactions with Watkins.
He began telling me about all the underage fans that he took the virginity of, and he was proud of it, and how he abused them, and how his favourite video that he had was of a 14-year-old schoolgirl stripping off and saying her name and date of birth to the camera just before he took her virginity, and just all the other vile things that you said he'd done to these fans. And that, I would say to him, stop talking, I don't want to hear it, just stop talking, it's upsetting me. He started saying that he wanted to get me pregnant just so that he could rape our daughter.
In February 2012, a man made a report to South Wales Police stating his daughter might have been molested by Watkins, who had filmed the assault. There are more reports, including in April 2012, when an Australian national contacted South Wales Police and said that Watkins had boasted about getting a 13-year-old high and having sex with her, and that he hoped she fell pregnant. Watkins also boasts about drugging other young girls to have sex with, and his hopes that they too would get pregnant. In June 2012, South Wales Police were contacted by another individual who stated that Watkins had, quote, an unnatural interest in children, and that he had texted her saying he wanted to drug and rape a baby. So South Wales Police were contacted by multiple people separately, all of whom basically made the same accusations about Watkins, that he was an unrepentant paedophile, and they did nothing. We'll return to this later. However, there was one report which gave an indication of the depravity of Watkins, and which brings up the worst offences he committed. In March 2012, South Yorkshire Police were contacted by a woman, known only as B to this day, who said that she believed that Watkins had sexually assaulted her 10-month-old son at a hotel in Cardiff. She also said there were rumours that Watkins had raped a 5-year-old. However, despite this report, B would end up in the court with Watkins, and her abusive trust of her son is nothing short of sickening. Court records state that B met Watkins in late 2011 when she was 19 years old. She was a fan of the Lost Prophets and was soon in communication with Watkins. B was a mother with a newborn baby, and her contacts with Watkins including them discussing him raping this child. B and Watkins met in a hotel in Cardiff in March 2012 after the pair discussed abusing the child, with B texting Watkins, quote, tell me if you want to get your dick in our boy. They had also both discussed drugging the child. Whether B called police because she was having second thoughts is uncertain, but what is clear is that just a month later, she was fully under Watkins' spell and would do whatever he wanted. Between the 2nd of April and the 3rd of April 2012, B and Watkins stayed in a hotel in London, and she, quote, presented her 10-month-old son to be raped by Watkins. He penetrated this child's mouth with his penis and tried to anally rape him. These acts were filmed, with B heard encouraging Watkins. Then, again whilst being filmed, B sexually abused her own son, including sucking his penis. On the 2nd of August 2012, Watkins sent B a message saying, quote, to be honest though, I think we have gone easy on him so far. Time to teach him and make him learn to love it. There was a second meeting at a hotel in Wales in September 2012, and after this meeting, B sent a picture to Watkins of her licking her son's penis. Anonymity has been given to both mother and child in this case, but obviously that child is still out there, and, inevitably, one day will have questions about their mother. God knows what they'll be told, and how finding out the truth would destroy their entire life. Also in the dock with Watkins was P, another mother who utterly betrayed the trust of her child, this time a baby girl. P was in her early 20s when she began communicating with Watkins in August 2012. Not long afterwards, the pair spoke about abusing her baby girl and moving in together. One of the text message exchanges went as follows. Watkins stated, quote, if you belong to me, so does your baby. P replied stating, quote, understandable, a mother-daughter slave duo worshipping you. Watkins said, quote, that's all she will know, a life of filth. The contact continued and involved conversations about P and her baby daughter performing oral sex on Watkins and their plan to drug this little girl and force her to have sex with animals. Watkins did not get his hands on this girl, but he watched via webcam whilst P penetrated her daughter's vagina with her finger, and she also sent in pictures of her genitals. None of the calls to the police led to any action, and eventually Watkins' downfall was due to his arrest in September 2012, following the execution of a drugs warrant. This resulted in computers, mobile phones and storage devices being seized, resulting in his sexual offending being exposed. In order to break the code on his laptop, South Wales Police had to employ the services of GCHQ, the UK's Communication Intelligence Agency. On screen is the password that unbelievably was found to be on Watkins's laptop. Watkins appeared in Cardiff Magistrates Court in December 2012, along with B and P, who had been identified and arrested due to the content of his computer. Watkins's barrister indicated that he would plead innocent to all offences. All three were remanded into custody. However, likely realising there was no way he could explain the material on his computer, mobile phones, etc., on the 26th of November 2013, Watkins pleaded guilty to 13 offences, including attempted rape and sexual assault of a child under 13, 3 counts of sexual assault involving children, 6 counts of taking, making or possessing indecent images of children, and 1 count of possessing an extreme pornographic image involving a sex act on an animal. Both B and P pleaded guilty to sexually assaulting their children, as well as facilitating Watkins abusing them. Sentence was set for the 18th of December 2013. During the sentencing hearing, the depravity and remorselessness of Watkins was laid bare. Not only the seriousness of the offences, but his behaviour since being remanded into custody. Specifically, a few days before his sentence, Watkins was recorded on a prison phone call saying, quote, "I do my charm, or do I end up making things worse for myself? Or do I just say I was off my head and can't remember?" He also said that he was going to release a statement saying that his abuse of children was, quote, "mega lols," whilst also stating, quote, "I don't know what everyone is getting so freaked out about." During the hearing, and showing the coward that he is, Watkins, through his barrister, claimed he could indeed not remember his sexual abuse against the children of B and P. None of this was accepted by the judge. Reference was made to a probation pre-sentence report where the author outlined their conversation with Watkins, who described wishing to push ever more extreme sexual boundaries. They assessed him as a dangerous sexual offender and wrote, quote, "It's also my assessment that the child victims in this case appear to be coincidental to his need to dominate and to test out the extent to which his sexual partners would collude and participate in his sexual interests." A police investigator said that Watkins was probably the most dangerous sex offender he had ever seen. Justice John Royce stated that the offences collectively, quote, "plumbed new depths of depravity." He also stated, in reference to Watkins, quote, "I'm satisfied that you are a deeply corrupting influence. You are highly manipulative. You are a sexual predator. You are dangerous. The public, and in particular young females and children, need protection from you." Turning to woman P and woman B, Justice Royce outlined their unspeakable actions and identified that both had utterly abused the trust placed in them as mothers. He then sentenced them. Ian Watkins was sentenced to 35 years in prison. He has to serve at least 19 years before he can apply for parole. Woman P was sentenced to 17 years in prison, to serve half in prison prior to release and the other half to be spent in the community monitored by probation. Woman B was sentenced to 14 years in prison. Again, half of this is served in prison, half in the community being monitored. By my calculation, both B and P will have been released by now. Watkins likely has another 9 years to serve before he can even apply for release. As the expression goes, how the mighty have fallen, Watkins went from a life of luxury to a 60-foot square cell at H&P Prison, Wakefield, a Category A prison in Wakefield, West Yorkshire, dubbed the, quote, "monster mansion," due to the high number of highly dangerous sex offenders who reside at the establishment. However, finally being caught for his crimes and time behind bars appears to have had little impact on Watkins, and he remains a highly dangerous sex offender. In 2017, it was reported that Watkins had been corresponding with a 21-year-old fan in which he joked about her toddler watching her have sex. Whether Watkins still considers his offences mega lols is unclear. What is apparent is that he is where he should be, and the fame that he used to groom and abuse others will inevitably come back to haunt him, as it will be this fame, and now infamy, which will mean that when he is eventually released, he will not have a moment's peace when the papers track his location and report his movements, likely for the rest of his life. As already stated, there were numerous chances to catch Watkins years before his eventual arrest, and this led to an investigation by the Independent Police Complaints Commission, the IPCC, who published a report in the summer of 2016. Within this, they said that 3 detectives from the South Wales force should face disciplinary action after they failed to act on earlier allegations. The report concluded, quote, "The consequence of the force's failings was arguably that a predatory paedophile offended over an extended period of time. The evidence obtained in this investigation suggests that South Wales police were faced with a litany of reports about his behaviour, yet in some instances did not carry out even rudimentary investigation, made errors and omissions, and missed opportunities to bring him to justice earlier than he ultimately was." South Wales police accepted the findings of the report and expressed regret for the handling of the Watkins case. However, I can see that one detective was cleared of misconduct, and I cannot find any information about action being taken against the other 2, so it would seem that nothing actually happened as a result of the police's failings in this case. I have no doubt that Watkins' brazen behaviour and his remorselessness before and after his conviction is because he bought into this idea that as a celebrity he was untouchable and the rules of normal people did not apply. Unfortunately, this seems to be a common problem. In the UK, the name of Jimmy Savile will go down in infamy as one of the most depraved sex offenders the country has ever seen, but also because he was never convicted in his lifetime, despite everyone knowing what he was. I'm struggling to believe that if Watkins had just been a random guy, that South Wales police would not have arrested him in 2 seconds flat. So, do you think that part of the issue in this case was Watkins being given a pass because he was a celebrity? Why is it that we give celebrities so much leniency and somehow place them above us? Or was it just police incompetence? Or both? Do you think Ian Watkins is one of the most dangerous paedophiles you've heard of? Joanna Dennehy is a British serial killer who, in the space of just 10 days in March 2013, stabbed 3 men to death and tried to murder 2 others before she was stopped. She later said she had planned to kill 9 men in total. Dennehy is one of only 2 women currently serving prison sentences in the UK who will never be released, the other being Rose West, who, along with her husband Fred, murdered at least 10 young women between 1973 and 1987 in Gloucester. The reason why Joanna Dennehy will spend the rest of her life in prison is the nature of her crimes, her lack of remorse, and her narcissism, with her describing herself as, quote, "a fully committed psychopath." Welcome to Evil Among Us. Joanna Christine Dennehy was born in August 1982 and grew up near the city of St Albans in Hertfordshire. She was raised by her mother Kathleen, her father Kevin, and she also had a sister Maria. I've looked into various reports and articles and can find no evidence of neglect or abuse in her childhood. In fact, it appears that Dennehy was raised in a loving and stable home. She did well at primary school and seemed to have a promising future, and she showed interest in becoming a lawyer. However, all that changed when Dennehy became a teenager and she began to rebel, and this included drinking alcohol and taking drugs in the company of criminals. Despite attempts by her parents to boundary her behaviour, Dennehy would run away from home, and she did this on at least 8 occasions between the ages of 15 and 16 years old. She would spend her time drinking and taking drugs with her negative peers and engaging in sexual activity with adult men and women. At around the age of 16, Dennehy met 21-year-old John Traynor whilst he was out walking his dog, and the pair began a volatile on-off relationship which lasted for the next 12 years. The pair had 2 daughters, including Cheyenne, who was born in 1999 when Dennehy was aged 17. Cheyenne later described happy memories of her mother initially, before her life descended into chaos, with her stating during an interview in 2019 that she recalled, quote, "My mum would love to read, She was always on the sofa reading a book, and she would go out on long walks. She loved Mr. Darcy. She read Pride and Prejudice. She would talk to me about it all the time. She'd do papier-mâché art with me and my friends. However, Cheyenne was also witness to the change in her mother, as she became an alcoholic and addicted to drugs, with her recounting, quote, "She'd gone out drinking. In the middle of the night, she sent a man to beat up my dad. It was terrifying. I was about 5, and I'd woken up, and I heard this shouting. There was this man outside shouting at my dad. He said, 'Joe has sent me here because you've done this,' but I didn't know what. My dad shouted at me to go back to bed, so I did. I didn't know what had happened after that, but I was petrified. My mum would just come home after being away for so long, and she'd have a black eye from a fight. She'd disappear for days on end, sometimes for months. She would come home, and she'd have cuts all over her, or she'd been cheating, and she'd have love bites. She'd have to hide it with a scarf. As time progressed, Dennehy showed complete indifference to the welfare of her children and would leave John to raise them. John later stated that he was fearful of Dennehy's volatility, with her regularly cutting herself across the stomach in front of him, and she would often sit at the breakfast table drinking spirits. Dennehy would regularly carry knives, and he recalled one occasion in 2009 when she returned home drunk, pulled a knife out of her boot, and plunged into the living room floor, yelling, quote, "I wish I could kill someone." Soon afterwards, John took the children and fled, with them having no contact with Dennehy until they saw the news articles about her crime spree. Prior to the murders, Dennehy was known to the police and had served time in prison for burglary. In 2012, the year before the murders, she was arrested for theft and had a psychological assessment. She was diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder as well as underlying psychopathic traits. She was described as a woman who was manipulative, lacking in any remorse for her behaviour, and prone to rage, impulsivity, violence, and explosive outbursts of anger. Dennehy was prescribed antipsychotic medication to try and manage her mental health issues. Before getting to the murders themselves, it's necessary to look at Dennehy's accomplices and her apparent allure to men in her life. 3 men eventually appeared at the dock with Dennehy when she was eventually sentenced, but I wish to focus on the main 2. Firstly, Gary Stretch, formerly Gary Richards, a hulking 7'3" man who was apparently besotted with Dennehy, and, as will be returned to later, even whilst awaiting his fate, still professed his undying love and devotion to her. He was a man with below-average intelligence and a long criminal record of offences motivated by money, including burglaries and robberies, and he seemed to be a man without any real purpose in life, who, at the age of 47, was living in dilapidated accommodation and had little real stake in society. The other man, 37-year-old Leslie Layton, didn't have a long criminal record, but was similarly rudderless in life and was enamoured with Dennehy. At the eventual court case, it was pointed out that both men were 2 of many individuals who Dennehy had under her spell. It's not explicitly stated why this was the case, but it appears that Dennehy would target disenfranchised and often vulnerable individuals who existed on the fringes of society. She paid attention to them, which I think made them feel special, and the superficial charm associated with her psychopathy likely made them think she genuinely had feelings for them. It appears that sex was a particular weapon in her arsenal, with her sleeping with men to form connections with them. It seems that these men found being around Dennehy exciting, with them reveling in her behaviour, and eventually, her infamy. However, any outward expressions of attention or affection were Dennehy's way of manipulating those around her, including these men, in order to obtain drink, drugs, accommodation, and eventually to have accomplices in her killing spree. In January 2013, Dennehy, by this point aged 30, met 48-year-old Kevin Lee in the town of Peterborough in the county of Cambridgeshire. Kevin rented out cheap rooms to vulnerable people, and the 2 soon began a sexual relationship. Dennehy was able to live rent-free and acted as Kevin's, quote, enforcer, threatening people who had not paid their rent and other debts. So you have Dennehy in an environment where she could manipulate and abuse, with Kevin Lee She used sex as a way to get what she wanted, in this case a roof over her head. She spun him lies to gain his sympathy, including claiming that she'd been abused as a child by her father and she'd eventually murdered him. None of this is true. With regards to her role as an enforcer, I've no doubt that Dennehy enjoyed victimising and abusing vulnerable people, likely finding the terror she instilled in them exhilarating. It was also around this time that Dennehy stopped taking her antipsychotic medication. Joanna Dennehy's first victim was Lukasz Slabozewski, a 31-year-old Polish national who had issues with drink and drugs and who lived close to Dennehy. How and where the two met is unclear, but it's believed that Dennehy only knew Lukasz for a matter of days before murdering him. However, even during this short time, he was clearly smitten, as he had texted a friend of his about his, quote, English girlfriend. On or around the 19th of March 2013, it's believed that Lukasz was lured to Dennehy's property with the promise of sex, and when he stepped in, was attacked. He was killed with a single stab wound to the heart. Dennehy then, treating this man's remains as garbage, put his body in a wheelie bin whilst figuring out what to do with him. However, Dennehy could not contain her excitement and glee about what she'd done, so Dennehy invited a 14-year-old girl she knew to the property, specifically to show her Lukasz's body in the wheelie bin. Dennehy then borrowed money from Kevin Lee and purchased a Vauxhall Astra and travelled by taxi with Gary Stretch to collect it. This was around the 21st of March 2013. The pair then drove around Peterborough with Lukasz's body in the boot and eventually dumped it off Thorney Dyke, a rural road which was near to where Stretch had lived some years before. The second victim was John Chapman, a 56-year-old vulnerable man who was a housemate of Dennehy's. Chapman was a man who'd served his country in the Royal Navy, but his life had deteriorated due to his issues with alcohol and he'd fallen on hard times. However, he was described as a, quote, kindly, harmless and inoffensive man, and Joanna Dennehy took full advantage of this. In the days before his murder, Dennehy, Gary Stretch and Leslie Latham were drinking his property. However, it seems there was an issue with John's tenancy, and he'd been served with an eviction notice, and it was Dennehy's job to get him out. She bragged to others she would do this by any means possible. John Chapman is believed to have been murdered in the early hours of the 29th of March 2013, whilst asleep in his living room. His blood alcohol level was 5 times the legal limit, so he was likely almost unconscious. Dennehy then attacked John and stabbed him once in the neck, severing his carotid artery, and 5 times in the chest, with 2 of these stab wounds passing through his heart. All of the wounds were delivered with considerable force. There were no defensive injuries on John's body, indicating that he likely died almost instantly, and thankfully had little idea what was going on. Dennehy then used John's mobile phone to call Gary Stretch to tell him what she had done. She also called Leslie Layton, who, rather than being horrified when he saw the scene in front of him, decided to take a photograph of John's dead body. Dennehy then went out shopping with a friend, without a care in the world, leaving John Chapman's body lying on his floor. The third murder was that of Kevin Lee, the man who'd taken Joanna Dennehy in. Why he was killed is unclear, but it seems likely he was just a convenient victim to be able to satisfy Dennehy's ever-growing bloodlust. He too was killed on the 29th of March 2013. He was lured to the property with suggestive text messages promising him sex, which he discussed just an hour before going to her property with a friend. When he went to Dennehy's property, she attacked him, stabbing him 5 times in the chest, with his injuries piercing his heart and lungs. Kevin was found to have defensive wounds, which indicated that he fought for his life. Joanna Dennehy now had 2 dead bodies to deal with at 2 different locations, and employed the help of both Layton and Stretch, who dutifully worked to help Dennehy clean up the murder scenes and dispose of the bodies. John Chapman's body was driven and dumped mere yards from the body of Lukasz Slabozewski, which has still not been discovered. Kevin Lee's remains were dumped in a remote rural area on the outskirts of Peterborough, called Newborough. However, Dennehy could not resist the temptation to further degrade Kevin, as if killing him was not bad enough. She dressed his corpse in a sequin dress of hers, then he was dumped wearing this, with his body being posed so that his buttocks were exposed. Dennehy took great delight, not only in killing the man who'd given her a place to live, but humiliating him even in death. She told people about the murder and was described as ecstatic. Joanna Dennehy and Gary Stretch appeared to have been under no illusions that they would eventually get caught and likely spend years, if not the rest of their lives, behind bars. But they were completely indifferent to this, with Stretch apparently laughing at this knowledge and stating, quote, "My kids are grown up, so I don't care." Joanna Dennehy and Gary Stretch then went on the run in order to get a head start on the police, and on the 2nd of April 2013, they travelled to Horiffic in Hertfordshire, approximately 140 miles away from Peterborough, an area that Stretch had previously lived in. However, it's clear they had no intention of lying low and were looking to terrorise people in a whole new county. The pair committed burglaries in quick succession, and somewhere along the journey, Stretch had apparently acquired a handgun, which he proudly displayed to criminals they met up with in the Hereford area, looking for ways to sell their ill-gotten gains. This CCTV footage shows Dennehy and Stretch wandering around a supermarket hand in hand. This footage shows the sheer size of Gary Stretch, who, as already stated, was 7 foot 3 inches tall, and potentially he was armed at this point. I find footage like this so strange. You have people just going about their day-to-day life, not knowing they're walking past a woman who had murdered 3 people. Makes you think who you may pass on the street today, doesn't it? Anyway, on the 3rd of April 2013, just 24 hours after they arrived in Hereford, Dennehy had decided she wished to kill again, and she and Stretch began cruising around the roads looking for targets. This CCTV footage is chilling, as it shows Dennehy in a shop on the same road as her first random victim, with her appearing, as it was described in court later, in a state of euphoria. Approximately a minute after Dennehy left this store, she came across 63-year-old Robert Buriza, a complete stranger to her. He was a retired fireman who was out walking his dogs. Dennehy approached him from behind, pulled out a large knife and stabbed Robin in the back, and then a second time in the right arm. Robin spun round and asked Dennehy why she was doing this, with her responding, quote, "I want to hurt you. I'm going to fucking kill you." Dennehy tried to continue to attack Robin, but he fought back, and eventually she stopped the attack and climbed back into the car with Stretch, and the pair drove away. Dennehy was apparently unsatisfied with this attack and demanded that Stretch find her another victim. Using his local knowledge, Stretch parked the car near a pathway frequented by dog walkers, and they soon saw 56-year-old John Rogers walking his dog. This second attack was less than 30 minutes after the first incident, and Dennehy was determined that this man would die. Again, she approached John from behind and began to stab him repeatedly in the back. When he turned round, she repeatedly stabbed him in the stomach and chest area. When he fell, Dennehy continued to stab him repeatedly while he lay helpless on the floor. This was a frenzied and ferocious attack, during which time Dennehy stabbed John Rogers approximately 35 to 40 times. John received deep wounds to his chest, abdomen and back. Both lungs collapsed, his bowels were perforated and exposed out of his body, and he received wounds to his hands, which caused severe nerve damage. John was found by a member of the public who called the police and an ambulance, and he was rushed to hospital, and by some miracle, he survived. However, in a cruel footnote, John Rogers passed away in November 2014, just 18 months after the attack. The police did not pursue additional charges for Dennehy for his murder, which I find odd. Sometimes in the UK, if someone later dies from an attack, then the offender could be charged with murder even years later if their death was linked to the injuries from the initial assault. I'd be surprised if the attack that John suffered did not have something to do with his death. Perhaps the police couldn't make a definitive link. Regardless, in my mind, Joanna Dennehy killed 4, not 3 people. Within minutes of stabbing John Rogers, the police apprehended Stretch and Dennehy, as all forces were already looking out for them for the murder of Kevin Lee, whose body had been found, but they were now linked to these 2 stabbings. Dennehy was taken to a police station, and this chilling footage shows her apparent indifference to her fate while she flirted with police officers.
L'autre que, nej, min smörn är den där för säga Like I need them version. So teacher I could take show signature from beautiful buggy fox. Like they one my phone. A change in minor and marrying you with a sleep conversation of attempted murder and
I think this clip shows 2 things. Firstly, the complete lack of remorse or concern from Dennehy, with her acting like she's just been arrested for shoplifting, rather than the attempted murder of 2 people and the murder of 1 other, with her knowing they would soon link her to a further 2. Also, I think it shows Dennehy's arrogance, manipulation and narcissism, with her default way of acting in any environment being a way to look to manipulate those around her to get what she wants, and she believes that, in this environment, somehow her fluttering her eyelids will get her special treatment. Dennehy was described as, quote, calm and cooperative during her police interview, but she gave little information. However, regardless of this, there was sufficient evidence to charge her with 3 counts of murder and 2 counts of attempted murder. Gary Stretch and Leslie Latham were both charged with crimes related to assisting Joanna Dennehy in her offences. Joanna Dennehy was remanded into custody soon after arrest to await her day in court, but incarceration did not stop her plotting acts of violence. In September 2013, prison officers at H&P Bronzefield found an escape plot written in her diary. This plan involved killing or seriously injuring a prison officer, cutting off their finger, and using this to fool the biometrics in the prison to escape. Dennehy was placed in solitary confinement and was produced for her court appearances under extremely high security. On the 18th of November 2013, at the Old Bailey in London, to the surprise of many, Joanna Dennehy pleaded guilty to all 3 murders and 2 counts of attempted murder. Gary Stretch was subsequently convicted after trial of 3 counts of preventing the lawful burial of a corpse and 1 count of attempted murder. His argument was that he was scared of Dennehy and had no choice but to help her. However, whilst awaiting the verdict in his trial, prison authorities intercepted letters between Stretch and Dennehy, which are frankly pathetic. In one of these he wrote, quote, "Right, stop blaming yourself for me being in this with you. It was my own choices, babe, 'cause I'm my own person. I can make up my own mind, so get off that trip." In another message he admits, quote, "Mad choices have been my undoing. It's not your fault. You did tell me to leave, but I never." He also promises, quote, "I'll do anything for you, which I've already proven to you. You are the one woman I ever truly loved." He signed the letter off as, quote, "Your personal undertaker." Now, I'm not a criminal genius, but I think it's probably pretty dim to write a letter that blows your entire defence out of the water. But this letter shows the continued pathetic, simpering loyalty that Gary Stretch had towards Joanna Dennehy, a woman whose association with had destroyed his life. I wonder if, in the years since, Stretch has worked out just how meaningless he was to her, like everyone was in Dennehy's life, and he was just another mark, used to get what she wanted. Anyway, Leslie Layton was found guilty of 2 counts of preventing the lawful burial of a body and 1 count of perverting the course of justice. Before sentencing, Joanna Dennehy was assessed by a psychiatrist, to whom she disclosed she had killed to see how it felt and, quote, to see if I was as cold as I thought I was. Then it got moreish, and I got a taste for it. Dennehy said that she had absolutely no remorse for the murders, but oddly stated that she regretted the attempted murders of the 2 men she targeted at random. Dennehy was reveling in discussing her offending, and her statements were not just confined to the conversations with the psychiatrist. She also wrote a letter directly to the judge, saying that she had no remorse, but again claimed that she regretted the other 2 offences, something the judge utterly rejected. As well as having antisocial personality disorder and traits of psychopathy, Dennehy was assessed as being sadomasochistic, i.e. deriving pleasure both from the giving and receiving of pain. She would apparently also frequently watch violent pornography. On the 28th of February 2014, Joanna Dennehy, Gary Stretch and Leslie Layton appeared at the Old Bailey for sentencing before Mr. Justice Spencer. Dennehy was seen smirking in the dock as the judge delivered his sentencing remarks. With regards to her, Justice Spencer rejected any implication that she felt any remorse for any of her crimes. He described her as, quote, a cruel, calculating, selfish and manipulative serial killer. With regards to Gary Stretch, Justice Spencer said that, as opposed to being scared of Dennehy, he was a willing participant and he revelled in her criminality and the media attention the offences would bring. With Leslie Layton, the judge dispelled any claim that he'd made about being afraid or coerced into any of the behaviour he'd been convicted of, with him pointing out that when he came across the body of John Chapman, he did not panic or raise the alarm. Instead, he took a photograph on his phone as some sort of morbid keepsake. He then sentenced them. For the murders of Lukas Slabozewski, John Chapman, and Kevin Lee, Joanna Dennehy was sentenced to a whole life order, meaning that she will never be released from prison. Gary Stretch was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum tariff of 19 years before he can apply for parole. Leslie Layton was sentenced to 14 years imprisonment, of which he was to serve half in prison and the other half on licence in the community. Therefore, he was likely released from prison in around 2021. Gary Stretch, likely beginning to realise the enormity of his situation, appealed his sentence as too severe in November 2014. His appeal was promptly rejected. Joanna Dennehy has been busy in prison. In 2018, she was granted permission to marry her cellmate, Hayley Palmer, and the pair apparently tried to kill themselves in a suicide pact later that same year. Dennehy told Hayley that she had no regrets about the crime she committed. In May 2021, it was again reported that Dennehy and Hayley were planning to marry, with Hayley by this point having been released from custody. Hayley disclosed letters that she'd been written by Dennehy, in which she stated, quote, to me you'll never be anything other than real, the first person to creep under my skin. You have a fully committed psychopath. Dennehy has also apparently made threats to kill Rose West, but they're currently in separate prisons. Joanna Dennehy is an anomaly, both in terms of her gender and her background, with female serial killers making up less than 20% of all known serial murderers, and those who do kill multiple people often having backgrounds of often horrific abuse. However, there is no evidence of abuse in Dennehy's background. She apparently grew up in a loving and happy household. However, I think in this case it's potentially things that happen outside the home, which is not disclosed, which are key to understanding the monster that Joanna Dennehy became. Specifically, it's recorded that Dennehy told people that she would not kill women or children, and she would only target men. I believe this was a twisted way of justifying the indefensible, but potentially gives an insight into her potential hatred of men, and that she felt that members of this gender were somehow fair game. A hatred of women has been speculated as being a motivating factor underpinning the murders of many male serial killers, including Ted Bundy and Levi Belfield, so potentially a hatred of men is a factor in the actions of some female serial killers. An obvious case is that of Eileen Wuornos, who had a history of being abused by males and who killed 7 men between 1989 and 1990 in Florida. If Dennehy did indeed have a hatred of men, I wouldn't be surprised if he had something to do with her wayward behaviour as a teenager, where she was drunk and high, and likely preyed upon by men who used her for their own purposes. This is unfortunately a common occurrence. There's a curious dichotomy with Dennehy, as, if she did indeed hate men, she also relied on them heavily to get what she wanted in her life. However, I don't think this meant she liked men. Potentially she saw those she came into contact with as weak and just a means to an end. Someone in my comments once mentioned about neurodevelopmental issues as potentially being linked to acts of violence and murder, and potentially this is true in the case of Dennehy. Perhaps there were issues in her brain development, which meant that areas linked to empathy and impulse control did not develop properly. These underlying issues would likely have been compounded by her heavy drug and alcohol use as a teenager, leading Joanna Dennehy to be a ticking time bomb, someone with no empathy, a propensity for violence, a lack of impulse control, and no remorse for her behaviour. It's also clear that sexual gratification played a part in Dennehy's offending, with her gaining sexual excitement from violence towards others. This is similar to many other cases. The one that springs to mind is Andrei Chikatilo, known as the Rostov Ripper, who killed at least 52 people between 1978 and 1990 in the Soviet Union. He was a man who gained sexual excitement from stabbing his victims to death, often to the point of orgasm. Whether anyone will ever understand Joanna Dennehy is unclear. She's been described as a pathological liar, so even if she told people the truth about how her issues started, would anyone believe her? Regardless, Joanna Dennehy will spend the rest of her life behind bars, and I'd be surprised if we've heard the last of her. In 1981, Renee Hartevelt, the Dutch national, accepted a dinner invitation from a university classmate, Issy Sagawa. It would be a fatal mistake, as Sagawa had, by this point, decided he wanted to kill, have sex with, and eat Renee, in that order, and this is exactly what he did. However, as if this is not bad enough, Sagawa faced no punishment and became a minor celebrity in Japan, making money from what he had done, which he freely confessed to. Welcome to Evil Among Us. Issey Sagawa was born on the 26th of April 1949 in Kobe, Japan, to wealthy parents. Sagawa was born prematurely. Reportedly, he was small enough that he could fit in the palm of his father's hand, and, whilst he survived, he had a number of health issues as a child and was extremely introverted. Sagawa apparently began to have fancies about cannibalism when he was only 5 or 6 years old, when he saw a male schoolmate's thigh which he wanted to eat. As he grew up, Sagawa became more socially isolated and disappeared into a world of sexual fantasy, including having sex with the corpses of women and eating them. As a youth, Sagawa also became interested in bestiality and began to engage in sexual acts with the family dog. Sagawa was a smart man and attended university in Japan, earning both a bachelor's and master's degree in literature, but his mask of sanity was beginning to slip. At age 24, Sagawa tried to act on his cannibalistic fantasies and broke into the home of a German woman, intending to kill her and eat her. When he broke in, she was asleep. He looked for something to knock her out or stab her with. Before Sagawa could do this, she woke up and overpowered him. Being only 4 foot 7 inches tall, this was easily done, as Sagawa fled. Sagawa was arrested for attempted rape, but money talks, and his father paid the victim and the charges disappeared. This experience did not deter Sagawa. Instead, he realized that he would need to refine his methods if he was going to achieve his ultimate goal of killing and eating a woman. In 1977, Sagawa relocated to Paris, France, to pursue his PhD. While there, he solicited prostitutes and brought them to his home with the intent to shoot and cannibalize them, but he said he was never able to pull the trigger. However, in 1981, Sagawa became obsessed with a classmate, Renee Hartevelt, a tall, beautiful Dutch woman whom he was instantly attracted to. According to Sagawa, Renee liked his obvious intelligence, and he wrote her letters and invited her to concerts and exhibits. He was small and walked with a limp, yet she often went with him and seemed to want to spend time with him. On June the 11th, 1981, Segawa invited Renee to dinner at his apartment under the guise of translating poetry for a school assignment, which he would then record. By this point, he'd apparently already decided to eat her in order to, quote, absorb her energy. He hid a gun in the apartment before she arrived, and when Renee was there, he seized her on the floor, Japanese-style to drink tea. He poured some whiskey into her tea to make her more pliable. He then told Renee that he was in love with her and wanted to have sex with her. Renee turned him down and said she just wanted to be friends. She then sat at the table on the right of this picture and began to read poetry. Segawa approached her from behind, aimed the rifle at the back of her head, and shot Renee dead. Segawa apparently fainted when he saw the blood, and when he came to his senses, he decided to desecrate Renee's body. Segawa first had sex with Renee's corpse and then tried to bite into her flesh with his teeth, but realized they were not sharp enough. So he went out and bought a butcher's knife and then began to dismember and eat Renee. Segawa describes his offending in an interview years later, in which, in response to a question about whether he ate Renee's flesh raw, he stated, quote, "Mostly yes. At first I bit into her butt with the intention of munching right through, but it's impossible. Human skin is so thick, I ended up with a sore jaw, although I managed to leave some teeth marks. I ended up swallowing the clitoris and some pubes without chewing on it, because she had her period then and the smell was just horrendous. But it was the first moment that I actually felt a sort of sexual pleasure in eating her, as if my inner body was on fire. Also, you know how beef or whale meat has a sort of beastly smell to it? Human meat is odorless. I actually believe that human meat is the tastiest of all meats. It doesn't have any of that gamey animal smell. When I ate some more a couple of days later, just before I got arrested, the meat had become sweeter and it tasted great. The meat on the soles of the feet smelled bad though, and didn't taste very nice. The neck was the best. The meat tastes more delicate as you move up the body, especially above the torso. Her tongue was delicious as well. I took it out of her mouth and chewed on it raw. Neither the neck nor the tongue has much meat on it though, so if you really want to feast, you should eat the thighs." Segawa removed one of Renee's breasts, fried and tried to eat it. He also cut off and ate parts of her face, buttocks, feet, thighs and neck, either raw or cooked. Other parts of her he kept in the fridge for consuming later. He also apparently used one of her hands to masturbate himself and slept with what remained of her corpse. However, by day 2, the body had started to decompose, and Segawa realized he had to get rid of Renee. What was left of her body he further dismembered, including chopping off her head, partly to obtain more flesh to store, but also to fit her remains in 2 suitcases which he had bought. Segawa had decided to dump the suitcase in a lake in the Bois de Boulogne, a large park in Paris. However, when he got there, he had trouble locating the suitcase and was seen by witnesses, which meant that he fled and simply left the cases on the grass. The witnesses approached and saw a human hand protruding from one of the suitcases and called the police. When they opened the suitcases, they saw parts of a human body sticking out of some sheets used to wrap something bloody. This is a picture of one of the suitcases and its concealed contents. The suitcases contained Renee's dismembered body, cut into at least 6 pieces. Due to Segawa's distinctive appearance, it did not take the police long to find him and arrest him, and in the 4 days between the dumping of the body and his apprehension, Segawa continued to eat parts of Renee's body. When the police searched the property, they found his fridge filled with parts of her flesh, which he was intending to eat at a later date. As if the crime was not bad enough, what happened next is beyond belief. So Segawa was taken into police custody, and his wealthy father again assisted him by hiring a top lawyer. Segawa freely admitted his crimes and was sent to a mental hospital, where he was held for 2 years and deemed to be unfit to stand trial. Therefore, any charges was dropped, and the file apparently sealed. He was then returned to Japan and committed to a mental institution, where he was deemed sane, and because the charges had been dropped by the French authorities, he was able to simply check himself out, which he did on the 12th of August 1986, with him spending the rest of his life as a free man. Trust me, it gets worse. So instead of being shunned by society, Segawa became a minor celebrity in Japan. He even became a food critic, and no, I'm not joking. Segawa was only too happy to tell people about his crimes on television talk shows. He even agreed to appear in several Japanese pornographic films, and he wrote 4 novels. The one in which he described the details of his murder sold over 200,000 copies. This clip shows him talking about one of his books, published apparently by a peddler of Lolita manga porn. What's really messed up about this clip is that the cartoon head he is holding is clearly that of Renee. I've seen a picture of the severed head, which I would not advise, and he's clearly gone to great pains to make sure that her truly horrific facial expression is captured accurately. Segawa also wrote a weekly column for a tabloid publication, edited an anthology of cannibal fantasies, and was featured on the cover of a Japanese gourmet magazine. Segawa revelled in his crimes and showed no remorse. He once stated, quote, "The public has made me the godfather of cannibalism, and I'm happy about that." I mean, where do I start with this one? Firstly, poor woman. And no shit she was scared. You just told her you killed and cannibalized a woman and showed her pictures of her dismembered body. But on top of that, this demonstrates what an absolute monster Segawa was. He's reveling in his crimes and clearly getting off on terrifying this woman. Also, the dick behind the camera, clearly setting this up to capture this woman's reaction, and this feeds into what I'm going to discuss in a bit about celebrity criminals. But seriously, what is wrong with people? Segawa cited that his life was hard because of what he had done, mainly because he could not get a regular job, and as his fame waned, so did the money. He made some bizarre statements about how he wished to die, with him stating, quote, "I would like to invite any woman who wants to kill me to step forward. Beautiful women only. That would be the ideal way for me to die. Maybe they could shoot me up with morphine so that I don't feel any pain. Although I guess the pain is part of the pleasure. Dying instantly is boring, so I want to savour the process of being killed." An alternative would be to drown in female saliva. Wouldn't it be wonderful to be covered all over in women's spit? If I could die drowning in it, that would be my ultimate dream come true. I'm a cowardly man who killed another person, yet I can't face killing myself, so I guess dying at the hands of a woman would be my way to redemption. And that is the key word here, cowardly. This man would not end his own life but wanted someone else to do it, and in such a way that meant he could continue to live out his sick sexual fantasies. I think this is the reason why Segawa never killed again, due to fear, as Japan has the death penalty, and he knew further offences would likely lead to him losing his worthless life. Fortunately, Issei Segawa died on the 24th of November 2022, at age 73 at a hospital in Tokyo, due to complications of pneumonia. He had suffered years of ill health and his fame had essentially ended, leaving him destitute. I don't think I've come across a more disturbing case than this, not only in terms of the crime, but how Segawa essentially got away with it. It's clear that he was a highly dangerous and remorseless sexual deviant, with the only saving graces being that he is now dead and he did not kill again. Rather than talking about the profile of Issei Segawa specifically, I want to raise another part of this case which really angers me, and that's the fact that he became a celebrity due to his crimes. I cannot imagine what Renee's family must have felt, knowing not only that their daughter had been butchered, but the man who did it was free and making money off what he did. This reminds me of scenes of the trials of Ted Bundy and Rich Ramirez, where women would flock to see them, as well as writing them sexually explicit letters. I also can't imagine what it must have been like for the families of the many, many victims of these men, whose lives have been utterly destroyed, seeing a gaggle of women sat there, fluttering their eyelids at these ruthless killers whilst making kissy faces. It just beggars belief, given the fact that, if they could, both men would have probably raped and murdered these women. So there seem to be two parts to this behaviour. Firstly, there's actually a condition where people can have a sexual arousal to dangerous situations or dangerous people called hybriskophilia, so this seems to account for some of this attention. However, others have said it's part of our wider obsession with celebrities, with us being obsessed with the life of others and their fame, even if it's actually infamy. With killers, it may be that the draw is the fact these people have broken social norms and done something so horrific that our attention is drawn to them. A bit like when you see an accident on the motorway, you can't help but slow down and have a look. In the case of Segawa, I think that making him a food critic was a way to shock people so they would buy more papers or magazines, and the dick that was filming the interaction between the porn star and Segawa likely went bragging about the fact he had filmed the awful interaction between her and the Kobe cannibal. So it's a case of, yeah, so he killed and ate a woman, but he can make me rich and famous. Ultimately, the person who should be focused on and remembered in this case is Renee, a beautiful young woman whose life was ended horrifically by a pathetic excuse for a man who, if there's any justice, is suffering some torment somewhere from which he will get no rest and there will be no end. Lucy Letby is the 33-year-old woman who worked as a registered nurse in the neonatal unit at the Countess of Chester Hospital from 2011 to 2016, which offers high dependency care for babies who are often extremely unwell, including those who are born prematurely. The children here are the most vulnerable, the most in need of love, professional care and protection, with the staff who work in this unit being tasked with one of the greatest responsibilities in the entire medical field. Letby utterly abused this trust, and in the space of just 12 months, murdered 7 babies and attempted to murder 6 others, with most of her victims being days, or in some cases hours old. This is a shocking case which has been in the newspapers since her first arrest in July 2018. It was only at her trial that the true scale of Letby's horrific crimes and her completely inhumane behaviour were laid bare, showing that she is an extremely dangerous, calculating and depraved woman who has now been proven to be a serial killer and one of the worst child killers in UK history. Welcome to Evil Among Us. Lucy Letby was born on the 4th of January 1990 in the city of Hereford, in the county of Herefordshire, in the UK. She's the only child of Susan and John Letby, and was apparently raised in what has been described as a middle-class family. Letby attended mainstream school and was described as an awkward but polite child, who her friends described as one of the, quote, geeky girls. From a very young age, Letby wanted to be a nurse, and so, after school, she enrolled in the University of Chester to study nursing, graduating with a degree in 2011. She was the first person from her family to go to university and was described by friends as, quote, always the first home on a night out, taking her studies seriously. Letby remained in the city of Chester and joined the Countess of Chester Hospital straight after graduation, began working in the neonatal unit of the hospital, which is shown in this video, which hauntingly shows the scene of Letby's crimes. She would remain working here until her first arrest in 2018. However, it should be noted that while she was mainly based here, she did cover shifts at other hospitals. Letby had been the focus of some attention in her role. On the 6th of February 2012, she appeared in a photo holding a baby as part of a story about a resident who had donated money to the hospital's appeal. On the 28th of March 2013, Letby was the subject of a short interview about her job, in which she stated her role at the hospital involved, quote, caring for a wide range of babies, requiring various levels of support, and that she enjoyed, quote, seeing them progress and supporting their families. A picture that has become synonymous with this case was taken whilst Letby completed a placement at Liverpool Women's Hospital. In addition, on the 6th of August 2015, Letby appeared in a newspaper article about fundraising. However, by the time this article was published, Letby had killed 4 children and attempted to murder 2 others. Lucy Letby was sociable and outgoing. She seemed to have a good circle of friends. Several photos have been released of her on nights out, having a good time. She seemed, outwardly, entirely normal. There's no recorded abuse of her background, and Lucy Letby appeared to be completely normal to those around her. She had no disciplinary issues at work, and there were no obvious concerns about her behaviour whilst working as a nurse. This is what made what happened over the course of just 12 months, between June 2015 and June 2016, so inexplicable, with Letby engaging in a campaign of murder which would shock the country. All the victims were referred to by letters in the court proceedings, and I'll follow this pattern, but whilst they're referred to as child A, B, etc., I'm going to predominantly call them babies, because that's what they were, and this reinforces the fragility of those that Letby targeted and killed. We're going to go through each crime, each murder, each attempted murder, as I think that's the only way that the true horror in this case can be laid bare. Lucy Letby's first confirmed murder victim was a baby boy known as A, who was born prematurely at 8:31 p.m. on the 7th of June 2015, and he was admitted to the neonatal intensive care unit at the Countess of Chester Hospital. The next day, he was improving and was breathing on his own in his incubator and was being fed express breast milk. Despite being premature, baby A was relatively healthy. At 7:30 p.m. on the 8th of June 2015, Lucy Letby came on shift and had a handover meeting with the day nurse who'd been assigned to look after A. Letby then went onto the ward at 8 p.m, and just 26 minutes later, she called a senior doctor to the baby's incubator and said the baby was in distress. They noticed odd discoloration on the boy's skin, who was now unconscious and in cardiac arrest. Despite attempts to revive him, baby A was pronounced dead at 8:58 p.m, just over 24 hours after his birth. It was determined that baby A had most likely been injected with air into his bloodstream minutes before his cardiac arrest. So this would mean that Letby had injected air into this child's body at around 8:20 p.m, just 20 minutes after she entered the ward. She'd never met this child before, so killed him within 20 minutes of seeing him for the first time. As this recurring theme, I want to summarise why air in the bloodstream is so dangerous. Basically, injecting air introduces gas bubbles into the body, which then can block the passage of blood, leading to organs shutting down. If this occurs in the heart, it can lead to a heart attack. In the brain, it can result in stroke. It can prove fatal extremely quickly. An expert at court stated the injection of air into baby A's body was done, quote, by someone who knew it would cause significant harm. Just over 24 hours after murdering baby A, Letby targeted his twin sister, baby B, who was also in intensive care on the neonatal unit. Just before midnight on the 9th of June 2015, doctors were alerted to the fact that B's blood oxygen level was dangerously low, and the nasal prongs which were feeding her additional oxygen had been removed. These were replaced, and B was given additional oxygen, which meant she luckily stabilised. It's believed that Letby removed the prongs and also potentially injected her with oxygen. Baby C was a little boy, born prematurely at 30 weeks, weighing just 800 grams, and was in intensive care, but was doing well. The late evening of the 13th of June 2015, approximately 5 days after his birth, Lucy Letby was on shift and had been assigned to look after a poorly baby in the adjacent room. The assigned nurse for baby C stepped out briefly, and, when she returned, she found Lucy Letby in the room and the child in cardiac arrest. It's believed that Lucy Letby, in those few moments that baby was left alone, had injected air into his body via his nose tube. Doctors battled to save baby C's life, but were unable to. His parents were sat in the family room, obviously going out of their mind with worry, and Letby kept going in there and had to be told by a senior nurse to leave them alone, as she wasn't even the assigned nurse for their child. Doctors couldn't save C, but kept working on him for an entire hour so that the parents could organise for their child to be baptised. Knowing the baby would not survive, he was handed to his parents to spend the last few seconds with him. He was still gasping and had a pulse, but the doctors explained this was merely a brainstem response and would soon stop. However, whilst trying to spend precious seconds with their baby boy, C's father later recalled a nurse, he believed to be Letby, come in holding a basket to take the body away, with her saying, quote, "You've said your goodbyes, do you want me to put him in here?" This poor man was shocked, and he recalled in a written statement his wife saying, quote, "He's not dead yet." The next day, Letby looked up the parents on Facebook. The timing of this search indicates it was the first thing she likely did when she woke up the next day. She's shown to have repeatedly searched for them for months afterwards, including on Christmas Day. Baby D, a little girl, was born at 4:01 p.m. on the 20th of June 2015. She wasn't premature and weighed 6 pounds 14 ounces at birth. However, there were some concerns about her breathing, so she remained in the hospital under observation. Tragically, at court, it was disclosed that D ended up on the neonatal ward due to a mistake made by the hospital. On the 21st of June 2015, when the parents went to see their newborn, D's mother spotted Letby hovering by her daughter. At one point, the mother said that, quote, she was sort of hovering around D, not doing much. She had a clipboard to take notes. It got to the point where D's mother asked her husband to ask Letby to leave the room so they could spend time alone with their daughter. At around 4 a.m. on the 22nd of June 2015, just 2 days after Dee's birth, her parents were woken up in the room they were sleeping in and told that their daughter's condition had deteriorated rapidly. Moments before this, Letby had injected air into the child's bloodstream. Doctors battled to save her life and were able to revive her twice. When she was revived the second time, Dee was distressed and crying before going into respiratory and cardiac arrest for a third time. She could not be revived. She died Just hours after murdering baby D, Lucy Letby was messaging friends with one text saying, quote, "We had such a rubbish night. Our job is just far too sad sometimes," and that she was having, quote, "a tough time." In response, colleagues were reassuring her that she was not at fault and simply needed a break. Lucy Letby again looked up the parents of baby D on Facebook soon after their daughter's murder. Baby E was a little boy, one of twins who was meant to be born in a different hospital, but due to a lack of bed space, his mother was sent to the Countess of Chester Hospital, where she gave birth to twins on the 31st of July 2015. Both children were premature and needed extra support, so were sent to the neonatal unit. On the evening of the 3rd of August 2015, E's mother visited her son in the unit and walked in to find Letby standing over him, and he had blood pouring from his mouth. Letby reassured E's mother, saying that everything was okay and that a senior doctor would soon be coming in to check on her son's condition. She ushers the mother out of the room, saying, quote, "Trust me, I'm a nurse." Doctors rushed to help E, who had blood pouring out of his nose and mouth. It's not clear what Letby did exactly, but it's believed she forced some instrument, potentially a feeding tube, down E's throat, causing a massive amount of damage. She had also injected him with air. Repeated attempts were made to resuscitate child E, but it was fruitless, and he died in the early hours of the 4th of August 2015. Lucy Letby then falsified medical records to try and make it look as though she was in a different room when baby E began to deteriorate. The next day, the 5th of August 2015, Lucy Letby attempted to murder baby E's twin brother, baby F. He was being fed intravenously through a bag, and Letby switched her weapon of choice. This time, she injected insulin into the bag. Soon after this, his heart rate dropped, but doctors were able to stabilize him. Insulin is a naturally occurring hormone made by your pancreas that helps regulate the amount of sugar, also known as glucose, in your blood, helping it be sent to your organs to function, or putting it into storage for later use. Glucose is the body's fuel, and too much insulin means too much glucose is taken from the bloodstream, meaning there's not enough fuel for your organs to function. In severe cases, this can lead to organ damage or organ failure, unconsciousness, and even death. Again, soon afterwards, Lucy Letby took to Facebook to search for the family of babies E and F, including on Christmas Day. Her next victim would be baby G, a baby girl who was born very prematurely in a different hospital, weighing just 1 pound 2 ounces at birth. She was transferred to the neonatal unit at the Countess of Chester Hospital in August 2015 and was doing well. When she was 100 days old, the staff had a little party to mark the milestone, but the next day, the 7th of September 2015, Lucy Letby fed an excessive amount of milk to baby G through her nasogastric tube, and also, probably, injected her with air at the same time. The reaction was almost immediate. Baby G was in horrific amounts of distress and was struggling to breathe whilst projectile vomiting. Doctors worked to save her and succeeded, as she was sent to another hospital where she soon recovered. She was then returned to the neonatal unit at the Countess of Chester on the 16th of September 2015. On the 21st of September 2015, Lucy Letby was working a day shift, and in the morning, she again fed baby G an excessive amount of milk and likely again injected air into her bloodstream. Again, she began to projectile vomit and briefly stopped breathing before being stabilized. She was then put on a monitor to measure her oxygen level and her heart rate. But around 3 p.m. that same afternoon, Letby was heard to shout for help and was found standing over baby G, who was again struggling to breathe, and Letby was apparently trying to help stabilize her. The monitor had been switched off. Doctors intervened, and baby G was saved due to Letby having, quote, discovered her in time. The murder of baby I, a baby girl, is particularly heinous and shows the evil of Lucy Letby, her determination to kill the children she targeted, as well as her sadistic behaviour linked to her crimes. Before eventually taking baby I's life, Letby attempted to kill her 3 times before succeeding. Baby I was 2 months old. She was in the neonatal unit due to being born prematurely, but she was doing well. On the 30th of September 2015, baby I was found struggling to breathe just 30 minutes after Letby had fed her. On the 13th of October 2015, another nurse on the night shift saw Letby lurking in the doorway of Baby I's room. They then checked on her and found that she looked extremely pale and was obviously struggling to breathe. Again, Baby I was stabilised. In the early hours of the 23rd of October, another collapse occurred, but Baby I was resuscitated and recovered to the point where she was showing signs of hunger. Less than an hour later, an alarm went off and doctors rushed to Baby I's incubator and found Letby stood beside it. Baby I went into respiratory and cardiac arrest and could not be revived. It appears that on each occasion, Letby had injected air into this child's bloodstream. Baby I's mother was obviously devastated by the loss of her daughter, who was doing so well, and, as part of the bereavement service offered by the unit, she was given time alone with her daughter to give her a bath and say her goodbyes. However, she said in court later that when she was alone with her daughter bathing her, Letby came into the room, quote, smiling and kept going on about how she was present at Baby I's first bath and how much Baby I had loved it. This obviously distressed Baby I's mother. She was trying to spend time with her daughter for the last time, and Lucy Letby was there beaming in this tragic moment. I want to refer to the line of questioning regarding this incident from Lucy Letby's trial in 2023. These are all direct quotes. So, with regard to the comment about the bath, the prosecution asked her, "Why did you say that?" Letby replied, "I was trying in this awful situation to have a little bit of normality, and I was referring to a positive memory. It was not meant with any malice. It was just trying to reflect on a happier memory." The prosecution said, "How can you sit there and say Baby I was enjoying her first bath when she was dead?" Letby said, "She had her first bath when she was alive. That was what I was referring to. I was referring to the earlier bath." Just a break here, there was no earlier bath. The prosecutor asked, "Were you getting a thrill out of what you were watching, the grief and despair you were watching in that room?" Letby said, "Absolutely not." In addition, Lucy Letby sent a letter of condolence to the family of Baby I, something the nurses never usually did. Babies L and M were newly born twin boys. On the 9th of April 2016 during the day shift, Letby injected insulin into Baby L, having increased the dosage she used before. She also injected air into Baby M's bloodstream. I believe these children were in the same room. Both children became poorly quickly. With regards to Baby L, he was described as, quote, close to death, after his heart rate and breathing dropped dramatically without warning, but he improved on the night shift that day, when Letby was not around, or went on to make a speedy recovery. Baby M was also stabilised quickly and recovered when Letby was not on shift. Baby N was a baby boy who was born at 34 weeks, weighing only 3 pounds 6 ounces, and Lucy Letby attempts to kill him 3 times. At 1 a.m. on the 3rd of June 2016, he suffered a sudden lowering of his blood oxygen levels due to Letby most likely injecting him with air. 12 days later, on the 15th of June 2016, Letby tried to kill Baby N twice in one day. The first time, in the morning, by shoving a breathing tube down his throat, which caused blood in his mouth, restricting his breathing, which made it difficult for doctors to help him. At 3 p.m, he again was having difficulty breathing, and blood was again found in his mouth, suggesting that Letby had repeated the same thing and forced a breathing tube down his throat. However, he was able to be stabilised and subsequently recovered. Lucy Letby's last confirmed murder victims were a pair of baby boys, Baby O and Baby P, who were two triplets. Baby O lost his life on the 23rd of June 2016. He was healthy, but then suddenly rapidly declined. He could not be resuscitated. During his post-mortem, bruising was found to his liver, which was assumed to have been down to damage caused when doctors tried to save his life. However, it appears that Letby potentially hit this child with some force to his abdomen, as well as injecting him with air. Just a day later, Lucy Letby murdered Baby P, Baby O's brother, and the second child of the triplets. Preparations were being made to move Baby P to another hospital, when Letby is reported to have told a doctor, quote, "He's not leaving here alive, is he?" Soon afterwards, Baby P died, having air injected into his stomach, which then caused respiratory shutdown. Lucy Letby, in the space of just 12 months, had murdered 7 babies and attempted to murder 6 others. After the deaths of babies O and P in June 2016, Lucy Letby was moved to an administrative role, meaning she was still employed by the NHS but had no access to patients. This move was due to doctors in the hospital firmly believing that Letley was involved in these deaths and others. In terms of the stats, there was a 10% increase in the number of fatalities in the unit solely due to Letley's actions. Despite significant concerns, the police were not called immediately. I believe this didn't happen for over a year. Instead, internal investigations were conducted, as well as consultation with the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health and the Royal College of Nursing, who carried out their own investigations and completed reports. Eventually, based on these investigations, Cheshire Police were eventually contacted. It was apparent that someone had caused the deaths and injuries of numerous children, and the only consistent person present during all of these incidents was Lucy Letby, as shown by this chart. On the 3rd of July 2018, Lucy Letby was arrested by the police for the first time on suspicion of 8 counts of murder and 6 counts of attempted murder, and this video shows the knock on the door at her property in Westbourne Road, Chester, and also a very short clip of her police interview, which is all that's been released at the time of recording.
Hello, Lucy, is it? Yes. Hello, my name's Cheshire Police. Look, it's Stefan, 2 seconds.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, not a problem.
I'm going to put you in the back seat over here.
Hold on, man.
Yes.
Get the seat.
Okay, just take a seat in there for me, Lucy. I'll move that seat forward a bit. Shortly.
Yeah, I just had knee surgery.
Oh, right, okay.
They told me that there would be a lot more deaths and that I've been linked to somebody that was there for a lot of them.
Did you have any concerns that there was a rise in the mortality rate?
Yes.
Okay, so tell me about that. What concerns did you have?
I think we'd all just noticed as a team in general, the nursing staff, that this was a rise compared to previous years. They told me that there would be a lot more deaths and that I've been linked to somebody that was there for a lot of them.
Did you have any concerns that there was a rise in the mortality rate?
Yes.
Okay, so tell me about that. What concerns did you have?
I think we'd all just noticed as a team in general, the nursing staff, that this was a rise compared to previous years.
Lucy Letby's home was searched, and the police recovered incriminating evidence almost immediately. Most concerningly were notes that Letby had written, which appeared to be confessions to her crimes. These will be returned to later. In this Ibiza carrier bag, found by police in Lucy Letby's bedroom, were a number of hospital shift handover sheets from 2016, a month where she murdered 2 children and tried to kill 1 other. In this Morrison shopping bag, also recovered from her bedroom, police found 31 handover sheets and a blood gas reading for a child she'd attacked. Lucy Letby was released under investigation whilst police continued their inquiries. Finally, after this arrest in July 2018, 2 years after the last murders, she was suspended from her job with conditions not to enter the counters of Chester Hospital or any other medical facility unless it was a medical emergency. She was arrested again on the 10th of June 2019 and, after further questioning, again released. Lucy Letby's final arrest came on the 10th of November 2020 and, on the 11th of November 2020, she was charged with 8 counts of murder and 10 counts of attempted murder. She was remanded into custody to await her day in court. Lucy Letby pleaded not guilty to all charges, and so her trial began at Manchester Crown Court on the 10th of October 2022 before Mr. Justice Goss, with it being expected to last 6 months, but in fact, it lasted almost 9 months. The final set of charges related to the murder of 7 babies and the attempted murder of a further 10. The defence's strategy was to argue that all these incidents were as a result of, quote, massive failure of care in a busy hospital neonatal unit, far too great to blame on one person. However, the prosecution's case was extremely strong, including the fact that Letby had been on shift during each incident. She was physically seen in the area or in the room of the children immediately after they deteriorated, her behaviour around the children's families, and her searching for them on Facebook. However, one of the most damning pieces of evidence was a note that police recovered from Letby's home, which read, quote, "There are no words. I'm an awful person. I pay every day for that. No hope. I can't breathe. I can't focus. I'll never have children or marry. I'll never know what it's like to have a family. Kill myself right now. Overwhelming fear. Haven't done anything wrong. Police investigation. Forget. Slander, discrimination, victimization. Despair, panic, fear. Lost, hate. Hate myself so much. All getting too much. Everything taking over my life. I feel very alone and scared. What does the future hold? How can I get through it? How will things ever be like they were? They won't. I don't deserve to live. I did this. Why me? I killed them on purpose because I'm not good enough to care for them. And I am a horrible and evil person. I don't deserve mum and dad. The world is better off without me. I'm evil. I did this. In court, Letby claimed, when she gave evidence, that she wrote this because, quote, "I felt at the time that if I'd done something wrong, I must be such an evil, awful person. I'd somehow been incompetent and had done something wrong which had affected those babies." So what I think she's saying is that she didn't actually kill them, but she believed that something she had done led to their deaths. Right, that's not how it reads. Letby was asked about the documents in her property, and she denied that they were, quote, "souvenirs to remind her of her crimes." The jury began their deliberation on the 10th of July 2023, and on the 18th of August 2023, it was reported that Lucy Letby had been found guilty of the murders of 7 babies and the attempted murder of 6 others. Her sentencing hearing was scheduled for the 21st of August 2023. It should be noted that whilst the newspapers reported Lucy Letby's convictions on the 18th of August 2023, the verdicts had actually been read out over several hearings, I believe 3, in the days before this reporting. Letby was present during the first hearing, but refused to attend the rest. This cowardice extended to her sentencing. She refused to stand before Mr. Justice Goss to receive her punishment, her final act of defiance. There appeared to be plans to ensure that criminals of force would be at their sentencing, but, for the time being, there was nothing that could be done. However, in contrast to this thing's utter cowardice, many of the brave parents of the children she murdered and attempted to murder were in court, and some provided or read out victim impact statements, which are simply heartbreaking. This included a statement which read out on behalf of the father of baby G, who Letby tried to kill, which outlined how she'd been left severely disabled as a result of the attacks. She's registered blind, has cerebral palsy and scoliosis. She's in desperate need of spinal operations, but due to her vulnerabilities, she may not survive the surgery. Her father added, quote, "What if she outlives us? Who will care for her then? Her condition affects every aspect of our lives. We see other families and their children fishing, playing football, other things we can't do. She'll never have a sleepover, go to high school, have a boyfriend, get married." Baby I's mother stated, quote, "On the night Baby I died, we were speaking with the nurses in room 1, and they said at the rate she was improving, there was still a chance she could be home for Christmas. When they handed Baby I to us, we never wanted to let her go. We held her so tight. She was our gorgeous little princess, and I can't even begin to explain the pain when we lost her. A part of us died with her." The father of babies O and P, the twins Letby murdered, there were 2 of triplets, described the moment his first son died, with him saying, quote, "I noticed the colour of baby O's skin was changing rapidly. It didn't appear normal to the naked eye. It was horrific to see, and it's an image I'll never forget. Deep down, I knew it wasn't going to end well." Baby O received a blessing from the priest and was quickly christened. Moments later, he was gone. I felt like I'd been stabbed in the heart. No words could describe how I was feeling. I kept wishing it had happened to me, and at that time would have gladly taken his place. These statements highlight front and centre not only the devastation that Letby caused, but the bravery of these parents to get up and keep going, when I'm sure all they want to do is curl up into a ball, fade away, and be with their children again. I hope with all my heart those who were taken are safe, loved and protected. Those who have survived, I've No doubt their loving parents would give them the best quality of life they're able to, because they, unlike Lucy Letby, would give their lives for their children. Due to the cowardice of Letby, Justice Goss made his sentencing remarks and passed his sentence, speaking to an empty dock. The sentencing here was filmed. I'll include a small part of it, but we'll leave a link to the full thing in the description.
This was a cruel, calculated, and cynical campaign of child murder involving the smallest and most vulnerable of children, knowing that your actions were causing significant physical suffering and would cause untold mental suffering. You created situations so that collapses or causes of collapses would not be obvious or associated with you. You removed and retained confidential records of events relating to your crimes and checked up on bereaved parents. There was a deep malevolence bordering on sadism in your actions. During the course of this trial, you have coldly denied any responsibility for your wrongdoing and sought to attribute some fault to others. You have no remorse. There are no mitigating factors. In their totality, the offences of murder and attempted murder were of exceptionally high seriousness, and just punishment, according to law, requires a whole life order. Lucy Letby, on each of the 7 offences of murder and the 7 offences of attempted murder, I sentence you to imprisonment for life. Because the seriousness of your offences is exceptionally high, I direct that the early release provisions do not apply. The order of the court, therefore, is a whole life order on each and every offence, and you will spend the rest of your life in prison.
So Lucy Letby has been sentenced to a whole life order, meaning that she will never be released from prison. She's one of only 3 women in the UK prison system who are guaranteed to die behind bars, including Rose West and Joanna Dennehy. All 3 deserve their fates. Lucy Letby should be counting her blessings. She's been allowed to live, when she took this choice away from so many. If she had committed these crimes in the death penalty states in the US, no doubt she'd be spending the rest of her days on death row, waiting for a date with the executioner. Imagine that some people, despite her committing these crimes in the UK, where there is no death penalty, believe she should have suffered the same fate. Public inquiries about the crimes of Lucy Letby are already planned, and these will focus on whether she could have been stopped sooner. However, even at this early stage, it appears that warnings were ignored, which could have saved the lives of at least some of her victims. These stem from concerns raised by staff in October 2015 and early 2016. I'm going to play a clip from interview with Dr. John Gibbs, the consultant paediatrician on the neonatal unit, who discusses concerns about Letby that are ignored in early 2016.
It was the unusual nature of their collapses, the way they didn't respond as we'd expect to resuscitation, and for some of them, some unusual features such as strange rashes. And when this kept happening, then we became very worried something abnormal, something that couldn't be medically explained was happening.
At what point did you start to think what at that time must have been unthinkable?
Well, I think we all got extremely worried, us paediatricians. I got very worried by June 2016 because we'd had this review of some of the deaths in February 2016, which had shown that a number of them were unusual, unexpected, and had revealed that Lucy Letby was associated with all of those cases. And then in June 2016, there were several deaths in very quick succession of babies that we really, similar to some of the other babies, were doing very well. That the risk of them dying was small. We were expecting them to go home, and suddenly, one after another, they died. And that really worried us. And at that point, we felt something drastic had to be done to protect the babies on the unit.
It sounds like it was horrific being there, to be blunt.
Well, it's horrific whenever babies die in the neonatal unit. It's devastating for the parents. The fact we'd seen this many times over the previous year, far more than any of the 20-odd years that I've been working there before, was a big worry, yes.
Did it reach a point where, when an alarm went off, you were instantly worried that the same thing would be happening again?
Probably only by late 2016, by June certainly. When I went to the neonatal unit around that time for yet another collapse, I did feel, oh no, not another one.
And also I imagine you would get there and realise that Lucy Letby was in the area where this was happening as well.
Yes, and towards the end of that year, one's heart would sink when we saw Lucy Letby there again, yes.
And at that point, it sounds like your concern wasn't that she wasn't up to the job or that she wasn't a competent nurse. The concern was that she was deliberately harming babies.
Our worry was that she might be doing that because we couldn't understand why these babies, quite a few of them, were collapsing, why some of them were dying.
You and your colleagues started raising your concerns, didn't you?
Yes, they were raised at various intervals, yes, but particularly from February 2016, concerns were being raised and fed up to the senior managers.
Why did it then take so long for the police to be called in?
Well, I think there was resistance on the senior management side to involving the police, but I don't know quite why, and really the senior managers ought to be asked, because I think they were receiving advice from different sources. We paediatricians were certainly concerned that someone, and suspicions fell on Lucy Letby, could have been harming and perhaps killing patients on the unit. The managers, they have to answer for themselves. I think they were receiving advice or information, opinions from various sources. If they just listened to us hospital paediatricians, I think the police would have been called in a lot earlier.
So it appears that senior management within the hospital have a lot of questions to answer. It doesn't appear that Dr. Gibbs was the only doctor who raised concerns, and the hospital's top manager apparently demanded that doctors who raised the alert write letters of apology to Letby for the stress caused by questioning her actions. When Letby was eventually taken off the front line in June 2016 and put on clerical duties, this was apparently only after resistance from senior management. Also, she was based in an office with access to sensitive information in close proximity to senior managers who were investigating her, so clearly she could try and influence them. And if she heard something that may have been incriminating towards her, she had the opportunity to cover her tracks. I imagine that the story of the role the hospital had in allowing Letby to continue killing and attempting to kill innocent newborns will be truly shocking. There must be accountability when this is known. No hiding, no whitewashing. The public deserves the truth, and to know that something has been done to send a very clear message across the NHS, but more importantly to the patients and their families, so they know that when they're going to hospital, their safety and care is the primary concern, although that doesn't seem to have been true in this case. Lucy Letby has now been confirmed as a serial killer and the UK's most prolific killer of babies in modern times. She is a truly horrific individual who abused her position of trust so utterly to take away the lives of innocent, sick children who had no way of defending themselves or calling for help. This is nothing to say of the horror the family suffered, knowing that someone who they put their complete trust in was so sadistic and so evil. Just saying what this woman did is horrifying enough. Lucy Letby murdered 7 babies and tried to kill 6 others. However, the details which I present in this video are even more heinous. She killed babies who were only hours old, committed attacks within hours of each other, killed siblings, repeatedly tried to kill some of the babies over and over again, gave the grieving parents no peace, and has shown no remorse of any kind about anything she's done. Lucy Letby will spend the rest of her life in prison, but the question still remains why she did it. The truth is we don't know, and will likely never fully know. Letby has no vested interest in admitting her crimes. Her denial is probably the only thing she has left, and no doubt she'll appeal the convictions, and when this is unsuccessful, her length of sentence, both of which I have no doubt will be denied. We do have a similar case to draw on,
And that's the case of Beverly Allett, who, whilst working as a nurse in the Grantham and Kesteven Hospital in Lincolnshire, murdered 4 children, attempted to murder 3 more, and caused grievous bodily harm to a further 6 between February and April 1991. Why Allett committed her crimes has never been definitively identified. She's never admitted them, but it's believed that she suffered from 2 conditions: Munchausen syndrome and Munchausen syndrome by proxy. These are both rare psychological disorders where a person's main aim is to gain attention, with the former resulting from the sufferer pretending to be ill or deliberately producing symptoms of illness in themselves, and the latter being doing this to a third party. An example of Munchausen's by proxy would be a woman who deliberately makes her child ill in order to gain attention from medical professionals. The reason why Alice is believed to have suffered from both conditions is that she was known to feign injuries, with her wearing bandages and casts over fictitious injuries, as she spent a significant amount of time attending hospitals as a teenager, with reports of medical ailments which had no basis in reality. She also had a disturbing history of psychological problems. While trying to be a nurse, she smeared feces on the walls in a nursing home where she trained, and apparently also put this in the refrigerator for others to find. Her boyfriend at the time said later she was aggressive, manipulative, and deceptive, claiming false pregnancies as well as rapes before the end of the relationship. How with this profile she became a nurse is beyond me, but she did, and it's believed that when her own fictitious injuries didn't get her the attention she needed, she began to murder and harm children in her care. On one occasion, she was held for saving a child's life, with the staff not realising that she was the one who injected air into their bloodstream, which was her preferred method of attack, followed by an overdose of insulin, exactly like Lucy Letby. However, there are differences in these 2 cases. There's currently no real evidence that Lucy Letby displays traits of Munchausen syndrome. I think potentially there are some indicators of Munchausen's by proxy, as she does appear to have tried to use some of the deaths of the children to get reassurance from colleagues and attention. Like Allett, she was praised for saving the life of a child she herself had tried to murder. In addition, it's mentioned that she was infatuated with the doctor in the hospital, and on at least one occasion, she went to him to get help with the children that she'd harmed. So potentially her behaviour was also to get his attention. However, whilst I think this was part of her thinking, I believe it was a far less significant factor in this case compared to that of Beverly Allett, and that Lucy Letby's motivations and underlying issues are far more sinister and infinitely more dangerous. Specifically, I think that Lucy Letby is a psychopath, a narcissist, and a sadist. With regards to narcissism, I know that this personality disorder is complex, with different subcategories, but to simplify, the core of most narcissists is low self-esteem and often self-loathing and self-hatred. They spend their entire lives hiding behind a false identity that portrays them as charming, charismatic, confident, articulate, successful, and unique. Maintaining this facade is everything to the narcissist, and they crave what is known as narcissistic supply, other people giving them validation, admiration, reassurance, power, and control. This enables them to continue to craft a perception that, rather than the insecure person they are in fact superior and worthy of special treatment. This does make sense if you think about it. If you're trying to get as far away from feelings of yourself that you hate, you would convince yourself of the polar opposite. So it goes from I am inferior and unintelligent to I'm actually superior and a genius. As time progresses, they can start to fully believe their delusional thinking. If an incident occurs which pierces this shell and hits at the very core of the narcissist, they suffer a narcissistic injury where they experience the emotions they're so desperately trying to avoid. So for example, feelings of incompetence or unworthiness. In response, they go into what is known as the narcissistic rage, a response where they seek to get revenge against whoever or whatever has caused them to feel this way, and also as a way to reinforce to others the facade they're so desperate to project. Reflecting this onto Letby, I believe that at her core is likely cripplingly low self-esteem and self-loathing, with a significant part of this being that she wasn't sure she was actually capable of being a nurse, something she'd wanted to be since she was a child. As a shield to this, over the years, she created this perception that she was in fact superior to others, worthy of special attention and recognition. The fact she'd been in the papers for various things as part of her role likely fell into this, and I imagine she considered herself an amazing nurse, the best on the unit. I firmly believe that something happened in 2015 which shattered this, a major event, at least to her anyway, or a sequence of events which led Letby to suffer a narcissistic injury. I think this slightly has something to do with the hospital. Potentially she felt she wasn't getting special treatment. Maybe she was denied a promotion. It could have been any number of things. As a response, she hit at the very heart of the establishment, harming children on the ward as a way to bring the unit into disrepute, to punish the management or other staff for how they made her feel. Also, I think the crimes enabled her to reaffirm to herself how special she was. She was getting away with murder in plain sight, and I've no doubt this made her feel very clever, watching the chaos unfold and knowing she was the cause. And as she kept getting away with it, her feelings of superiority must have grown. This, in my opinion, would actually explain the note that she wrote, where she used the sentence, quote, "I killed them on purpose because I'm not good enough to care for them, and I am a horrible and evil person." She killed them because at her core, she didn't feel good enough. And when she was reminded of this, she responded by murdering and attempting to murder the children. Lucy Letby's clear narcissism is shown by other factors as well. Referring back to this note, despite her having killed 7 children, it's entirely self-centered. It's all about her. How will I get through this? I won't have a family. There's not a single word about anyone else but herself. Also, it's shown by her behaviour in court, specifically her lack of emotion when the details of the baby she murdered were read out in court. But when a doctor she knew, I believe the one she had feelings for, gave evidence, she began to cry. Letby couldn't care less about the children she murdered, but when someone she knew was standing up and telling the world about what she was really like, she couldn't handle it. She cried out of self-pity as her carefully crafted facade was being shattered. Her crimes themselves, and these last 2 points, I think are also clear evidence of her psychopathy. She has no remorse, no guilt, no empathy for what she has done. The only thing she cares about is how it's impacted her life. The last element, I believe, is sadism, which is intrinsically linked to the issue of narcissism and psychopathy. Specifically, I've no doubt that Letby felt extremely powerful, seeing the direct results of her crimes. She couldn't help but go into a room with a grieving mother, bathing her dead baby, in order to gloat and brag with a smile planted all over her face. She wanted to see what she had done. She wanted to see the pain in the mother's eyes. She likely felt a massive thrill, knowing that this mother was looking at the woman who'd killed her child, and she didn't know. Her checking on Facebook was again her looking for signs of the chaos she'd caused. She even looked at the grieving parents' details on Christmas Day. I've no doubt this sick, twisted woman, as part of her Christmas celebrations and a present to herself, was desperately hoping to see some tragic post about the parents' despair that their child or children were not there for their first Christmas. Again, I'm sure she would have been sat there, beaming, knowing she caused this. Also, she would have likely shuffled through the paperwork she'd taken from the hospital, her trophies, reliving her crimes. This all fed into her narcissism. I did these things, and no one knows. I am a genius. These are just my thoughts working on basic information. As the weeks, months and years progress, more details about Letby will likely be published, giving flesh to the bones of any psychological assessment of her. However, I think there's a strong possibility that whatever initially triggered Lucy Letby's crimes, by the end, she potentially just liked killing and was addicted to whatever this act gave her. In several of her notes found in her property, the phrase, quote, "please help me" is used. I interpret that as her stating, "Someone needs to stop me, as I can't stop killing." No doubt if she hadn't been caught, Lucy Letby would potentially have killed hundreds. The scary thing in this case is that even with every scrap of forensic information and a detailed profile of Letby's life, we may still never know exactly why she did what she did. As I said, she's unlikely to ever tell us, and will likely deny her crimes until her dying day. As I said, a serious case review, or several, will be completed, and I'd be surprised if there were not previous concerns about Letby, with her potentially injuring other children in various ways, whilst also in a narcissistic rage, but not going as far as killing them. I'd be extremely surprised if she simply began killing children one day, without any build-up. Letby did work shifts in other hospitals, and I think further crimes linked to her may be revealed in the future. Potentially what we currently know is just the tip of the iceberg. However, regardless of the fact that not all the puzzle pieces are present, I don't think it could be questioned that Lucy Letby is an extremely dangerous woman who caused untold misery to so many families, and whose crimes are some of the most heinous that the UK has ever seen. She deserves to spend the rest of her life shut away from society. In 2014, Breck Bednar was a 14-year-old schoolboy, and like many children his age, he spent time online gaming and chatting to his friends. Unfortunately, he was targeted and groomed by 18-year-old Lewis Daines, an extremely disturbed and dangerous man who murdered Breck. He then tried to cover his tracks by making the following call to the police.
Essex Police Emergency.
Hi there. Okay. Hello. I need police and a forensics team to my address, please.
What do you mean? What's happened?
My friend and I got into an altercation, and I'm the only one who came out alive.
Breck Bednar was born in London on March 17, 1999, to Lauren and Barry. By 2006, Breck's parents had divorced, and he lived with his mother and his 3 younger siblings, 12-year-old triplets Carly, Chloe, and Sebastian. He was a student at St Bede's School in Red Hill in Surrey in the UK, and a member of the Air Training Corps 135 Squadron, also in Red Hill, and was described by those who knew him as a polite, warm and compassionate young man. However, Breck struggled to make friends, and, like many children, he spent his time online gaming, forming connections with those he met online. In mid-2013, Breck was introduced to an online gaming group by a friend at church, and this group was run by Lewis Daines, an 18-year-old man who lived in Grays in Essex. There were only 8 members of this online group in total, and Daines was in control, with him banning members of the group at will, and the group communicated via headphones. Daines would boast to the group about his success as a software engineer. He claimed to live in New York, own various properties, and work for the government on top-secret projects. He also told them he had donated $2.5 million in Bitcoin to rebels fighting the government forces in Syria. Daines claimed to be a millionaire, the owner of several companies that were valued in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Daines would make these claims to all the members of the group, but it appears that as time progressed, he began to hone in on Breck, grooming him. Breck clearly loved the attention, believing that a wealthy tech entrepreneur was interested in him. He did not see the danger that he was in, or realize that the person he was talking to was extremely dangerous and a master manipulator. Lewis Daines was born in 1986, and it's reported that he had a troubled life. He was an only child and his parents divorced when he was young. After the separation, Daines' mother left the country and he spent time living with his grandmother and, it's also reported, spent some time in the care system. At the age of 16, so in around 2012, Daines moved into a property owned by his grandparents. Daines was described as a recluse by his neighbours, who barely saw him, with him spending almost all of his time sat in front of his computer gaming. It does appear that Daines had some skill with software engineering, although I cannot find out whether he had qualifications or whether he was simply self-taught. However, he was not a millionaire, did not own any companies, and was clearly a manipulative and narcissistic man who made up lies of extreme wealth and success in order to gain attention, with his stories being in contrast to his real existence, where he was unemployed and living rent-free in his grandparents' house. Daines also had a sexual interest in young boys and had already come to the attention of the police. This included in 2011, when he was arrested by the police on suspicion of 5 offences, including attempted rape, sexual activity without consent, as well as child pornography. This occurred when he was 15 years old, when he attempted to rape another boy. However, this was apparently investigated by Essex police, but he was not charged with any offences. It appears that Daines had set upon using gaming to identify and groom male children for sexual purposes, and in 2013, he had set his sights on Breck Bednar. Breck was clearly taken with the attention of Lewis Daines, a man who was telling him that he too could become a successful software engineer and a millionaire like him because he had, quote, that kind of mind. Daines told Breck that he was wasting his time with school and that they should go into business together. Daines used his power to block people online to isolate Breck, with him blocking his friends and especially those who tried to call him out on his lies. Daines would also get into Breck's head by telling him that his friends were talking about him behind his back and that he was the only one that he could trust. Lauren began to notice a change in her son's behaviour. He stopped going to church and socialising outside of his bedroom and would spend most of his time in front of the computer. She became concerned by the influence Daines was having on Breck, with him frequently telling her all the lies that Daines had told him about his wealth and success, which she was able to see through. Lauren tried to stop contact between Daines and Breck by threatening to take away his computer, but Daines would twist this into Breck's parents trying to control him rather than protect him. Daines convinced Breck that his parents and friends were just jealous and that he was the only one that he could trust and the only one who could see his true potential. During arguments with his mother, Breck would tell his mother, well, Lewis said this or that, and she was becoming increasingly concerned that he was grooming her son. Daines was clearly a skilled manipulator and was using classic grooming techniques, including establishing a bond with his victim, filling some sort of need in their life, making them feel special and unique, as well as isolating them from others. In December 2013, Breck's mother Lauren called Essex police, stating that their son was being groomed and she believed he was in danger. The police took no action. She did attempt to end the online relationship between Breck and Daines, but was unable to control everything her son was doing. She limited his access to electronic devices and added parental controls to lessen his contact with Daines. However, Daines would help Breck circumvent all of these barriers and encourage him to lie to his parents to remain in control of him. In early 2014, Daines began to put the next stage of his plan into action, meeting Breck. Daines told Breck that he was dying and wanted to hand over his business to him. However, they needed to meet face to face at his property in Grays, Essex, so he could show Breck the ropes before the handover. They arranged a meeting on the 17th of February 2014. What happened on the 17th of February 2014 at Lewis Daines' property in Grays, Essex, was clearly pre-planned, as in the weeks leading up to this date, he bought duct tape, condoms, syringes and cable ties. On the directions of Daines, Breck told his mother that he was going to stay at a friend's house for a sleepover near their home in Surrey, but he secretly took a train to Grays in Essex, and after taking a taxi to Daines' property, stepped through the front door. What happened next will never be known with certainty, but it appears that soon after arriving, Daines attacked Breck and tied him up. Police determined that sexual activity had taken place between the pair, but, understandably, they've never disclosed exactly what occurred, but I believe that this was likely non-consensual. Daines then cut Breck's throat with this knife, causing cataclysmic injuries, resulting in him bleeding to death in minutes. Daines then calmly took a shower and, shockingly, took pictures of Breck's dead body and shared them online with people, clearly to gain more attention. He took the bloody clothes he was wearing and put them in a rubbish bag. He also dumped his hard drives in water, clearly to erase the contents. And then, only then, he made the 999 call which I partially played during the intro, but here is a fuller version of that call.
Essex Police Emergency.
Hi there. Okay. Hello. I need police and a forensics team to my address, please.
What do you mean? What's happened?
My friend and I got into an altercation, and I'm the only one who came out alive.
Are you telling me you've killed somebody?
Yes, I am.
Right, and who am I speaking to?
My name is Lewis Daines. I'm 18 years old, and I live...
Right, okay. And what's actually happened?
My friend came to stay the night with me yesterday, feeling very down, feeling suicidal. And I woke up this morning, he was in a mess. I tried to calm him down. I hugged him, then said that I was there for him. He shrugged me off.
Can you just bear with me a second? Don't tell me any more, okay? You're telling me he is definitely dead?
Yes, I'm telling you he's definitely dead.
Bear with me a second. Right, okay, Lewis, I need you to just take me back through that again. So what happened last night?
Okay. He came to stay with me because he was feeling down. I tried
What's
my
his
best.
name?
Breck. B-R-E-C-K. Bednar. B-E-D-N-E-R.
Sorry, B-R-E...
C-K.
Breck?
Yes.
And then his surname is?
Bednar. B-E-D-N-E-R.
Okay, so he came to stay with you.
I can explain this to the officers when they get
I
here.
will just... I need to take these initial details.
I know. He came to stay with me the night. I did my best to comfort him. I woke up this morning. He was in a mess. I tried again.
Right, just slow down again, Lewis. I need to take these details. So did you have an argument with him last night?
No, we were fine.
You were fighting?
No, we were fine. We were fine last night. We both went to sleep. I said that we were fine.
Okay, but why did he come to stay with you?
Because he was fed up with his home life.
Right, because he was fed up with his home life.
He's had a lot of problems. I've known him for a long time. He came to stay with me. I was in Thailand last week on holiday. He was in Spain on holiday.
Okay.
We both got back.
So,
met up.
you both went to bed, and then what's happened this morning?
I woke up. He was just standing up. He was in a mess, hands on his face. I got up. I put my arms around him, and I said it was okay. He just shrugged me off and said no. I can't remember exactly what he said. He was going on about how he didn't want to go home. He was fed up with his life, and he didn't want to go.
Right,
and
okay.
I have a penknife on the side of, in my room, adjacent to my bed. I have a chest of drawers. After shaving the TV and stuff on there, I had a penknife on there, folded. He picked it up, opened it, and then lost control.
Slow down. Let me just take those details here. Penknife on the bedside table. Brett grabbed this.
Yes.
What, in order to harm himself?
No, in order to harm me. He opened it and then lost control.
To harm informant and opened it. It states he lost control.
In self-defense, put my left arm up to block him from stabbing me effectively. We struggled. I got him to the ground. He got up. I got the knife. Can you not interrupt me with this part?
Okay, go on.
Okay. This is being recorded anyway, isn't it?
Yep.
I grabbed the knife and I stabbed him once in the back of the neck, I believe somewhere near the brainstem. He turned around, tried to carry it on, and I think I stumbled on my chest of drawers. I fell over. I got back up, backed away, and then I don't remember exactly what happened, but the fight ended with me cutting his throat. I believe I turned around and I slashed his throat.
Right.
He fell face first on my bed. I tried to stop the bleeding.
Yep.
He fell onto the floor.
Yep.
I couldn't stop it. His throat was properly cut.
And he's still on the floor?
Yes. He fell onto the bed face first. I was trying to compress the wound at that time. And
Lewis, are you still in the room where Breck is?
No.
Where are you?
Look, don't interrupt me. Just let me explain this if this is being recorded. I didn't know what to do. I felt like
Right, is the house where you are is where you are and where Breck is, yeah? But you're in another room, are you?
Yes, I felt like taking my own life. I don't remember what happened after that. All I know is I dropped the knife in my hallway. I stripped down and just sat in the shower.
Right, you've left the weapon in the hallway.
Yes.
And have spent how long sitting in the shower?
I don't know. Look, are the police on their way? I can hear something.
They are.
Okay, I'm going to go and do my part. Please, thank you for your help.
Right, just listen.
Clearly, Lewis Daines is a narcissist, believing that he was smarter than the police and that his story would be believed without any questions being asked. But it's clear that alarm bells were ringing the second he started speaking on this call. I don't know about you, but if I killed a friend, even by accident, I'd be in an absolute state and probably couldn't string two words together. I definitely wouldn't sound like I was calling to order a pizza or book a taxi. The lack of emotion in this call by a man who's standing with the dead body of a 14-year-old boy that he just murdered at his feet is shocking, and I think highlights the evil of Lewis Daines. It's absolutely chilling. As well as the phone call, the police clearly found it strange that Daines had taken time to clean himself, destroy evidence, post pictures of Breck's body before calling them. It seems that Daines tried to change his story several times, claiming that Breck had tried to stab him and he'd killed him in self-defense, to then claiming that Breck had tried to kill himself with the knife, and when Daines tried to stop him, his throat was cut, apparently by accident. However, none of this was believed, and the evidence did not stack up. Breck had clearly been bound, and there was no evidence of any altercation between the pair. Lewis Daines was charged with murder. Clearly knowing that the case was airtight, Lewis Daines pleaded guilty to the murder of Breck Bednar and was set to be sentenced at Chelmsford Crown Court on the 12th of January 2015 before Mrs. Justice Cox. Daines attended his sentencing hearing wearing a suit and showing no emotion during the hearing and keeping his head down. The only movement from him was him shaking his head when details of the case were read out, which he disagreed with, specifically the implication that the murder of Breck was underpinned by a sexual and sadistic motivation. Justice Cox stated, quote, "Having lured the young victim to your flat, you murdered him. You had befriended Breck with a number of other adolescent friends through an online community. Your contact with Breck increased in a sinister way. The precise details of what happened in your flat are unclear and may never be known. I'm sure this murder was driven by sadistic or sexual motivation." She then sentenced him. Lewis Daines was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum tariff of 25 years before he can apply for parole. Before analysing Lewis Daines, it's necessary to outline his further behaviour after his imprisonment. Specifically, on the 26th of November 2015, so 10 months after his sentence, 2 blog posts appeared online entitled, quote, "BBC documentary, questions to be asked," and, quote, "open letter from Lewis Daines." Both reports have been written and posted by Daines himself. They are sickening postings, and it's clear that the main purpose is to cause further harm to the family whilst continuing to minimise his behaviour. I won't read either out completely, but read out parts and comment on these. So the second post starts with, quote, "The purpose of this statement is not intended to cause further distress to the family and friends of Breck. It is to put forward additional details unknown to the general public who did not know Breck or me. I have waited and respected the need for the family and friends of Breck to take full advantage of the media coverage and feel it's now time to release my own statement." Take full advantage of the media coverage. Their son was murdered. This is not media coverage that anyone in Breck's life wanted. And what right do you have to respond? The way this is worded is like a petulant child not getting attention, basically saying, "Why are you paying so much attention to them? What about me?" There's then lots of rambling basically stating that he's not a predatory sex offender against children. But then it becomes more sinister, with Danes stating, quote, "Breck was driven away from family life and towards the virtual world. He drew comfort from the friends he made online. Our community members and myself learned that Breck suffered severe abuse at home. Abuse from someone who was supposed to nurture him and care for him. Someone who was supposed to encourage him and support him in his hopes and dreams and in the career path that he had chosen. A career path he shared with us, his online friends, who would listen and try giving advice on how to deal with the abuse. We learned, and some of us witnessed and recorded, that abusive individual regularly coming home in a state of intoxication and letting fly with drunken, abusive behaviour at Breck, shouting and humiliating him, often turning violent, causing Breck to withdraw further into that virtual safe haven that he found online. This he shared with other members and myself. His abuser is well known to police. Various people have previously filed reports of child abuse and domestic violence with the police, which are on record and easily verifiable." He then adds, quote, "On reflection, I believe this is why he formed this strong emotional attachment to me. He obviously drew some kind of comfort in having others and myself to confide in, to talk about his domestic problems and abuse. Someone who encouraged him and tried to help him deal with the abuse and mixed up feelings, trying to advise him to try to choose his own path and not be coerced into careers and fundamental religious beliefs he did not believe in or want to follow. So, Breck was being abused and Danes was there to comfort him. His family drove him online, so basically they, not he, are ultimately responsible for his death. To be clear, there's no evidence of abuse, and even if there was, how does this justify what he did? Curiously, Dane says he won't name the alleged abusers, likely because they don't exist. Danes can't help continue to lie about his success, with him claiming that just prior to murdering Breck, he'd been offered a job abroad and had just returned from a successful business trip. Danes appears to generally feel aggrieved with any implication in the media that his life was not perfect, including the state of his flat, with him responding to reports that it was described as untidy by saying, quote, "The police photographs actually show a very clean, tidy, modern flat inside and outside in a very nice residential street, the opposite of what they describe it as." Sickeningly, this second blog post ends with the lines, quote, "Breck, you'll always be in my thoughts. I hope you're at peace. I am so sorry. Your friend, Lewis Danes." It appears likely that these posts were actually written by Danes, and either he posted them himself, using a mobile phone he obtained in prison, or potentially he dictated it to some weak-minded individual on the outside, who then posted it on his behalf. However, regardless of how it got there, it gives us further information to understand the evil that is Lewis Danes. Of course, we can only speculate, but I believe that he's likely what is known as a malignant narcissist. This is a subcategory of narcissistic personality disorder, which basically involves the sufferer being self-absorbed, having low empathy for others, and expecting special treatment from others due to their apparent superiority. However, this is often a mask, as sufferers usually have extreme issues with their self-esteem and such a fragile ego that they project to others the person they want to be as a way to desperately hide from the person they truly are. Malignant narcissism is considered a severe form of this condition, with sufferers displaying traits of often extremely abusive behaviour, victimizing others in order to get what they want. Traits of a malignant narcissist include being preoccupied with fantasies about beauty, brilliance, success and power, having an inability to handle criticism, being likely to take advantage of others to get what they want, having a lack of empathy for others, having no remorse for hurting others and no interest in apologizing unless it benefits them, and having a tendency to blame others for their own bad behavior. These individuals are practiced liars and manipulators, and will spin the most amazing tales of success, even if they're clearly lies, and, when confronted, they'll refuse to admit any fault and twist the narrative to make themselves seem like the victim. I think, based on these traits, it's easy to see why I think Lewis Danes fits into this category. He is a man who demanded special treatment from others and felt entitled to engage in sex acts with young boys, and would manipulate and coerce anyone to get his own way. His coldness after killing Breck on the phone call to 999, I think, shows his complete lack of any emotion or empathy. He knew that society would frown on his behaviour, but I think he struggles to understand what the issue is. Hence why he felt the need to comment about the media's portrayal of him. His sole focus is on how others see him. He can't get away from the fact he killed Breck, but of course it's everyone else's fault. It's Breck's family's fault for alleged abuse, and he was actually Breck's protector and his friend. His ego is so fragile that he even had to write about the fact that his flat was clean and tidy, and continued to lie about how successful he was. Personality disorders are lifelong conditions, with sufferers engaging with therapy to manage the traits of their condition. However, narcissists do not tend to seek out or accept treatment, as it would involve acknowledging their issues, letting the mask slip. It may be that Lewis Daines has a revelation in years to come, and shows genuine remorse, and tries to make amends for his behaviour, but I doubt it. I'm not sure he has the capacity to feel remorse, or any other emotion for anyone but himself. Lewis Daines is a monster, and I think will continue to pose a serious risk of harm to others until the day that he leaves this world. The death of Breck destroyed his family's life, and Lauren has been transparent about her struggles to come to terms with the death of her son and best friend, with her explaining that she basically couldn't get out of bed for a year after his death. However, as with many of my videos, it's amazing how brave these people are and how someone keeps going when they've suffered the most horrific of losses. A parent should never have to bury their child. Her heartache must have been compounded when she found out about the blog posts I just mentioned. The family did try to get them taken down, but was stonewalled, with them being told they needed to speak to Daines about removing them. I mean, seriously. Unfortunately, they still exist today. I won't link to them. They don't deserve any attention. Her heart must have further sunk when the Independent Police Complaints Commission cleared Essex Police of any wrongdoing in their handling of this case, specifically not acting on Lauren's call to them in December 2013. Lauren then set up the Breck Foundation, the link to which I'll put in the description. It's a really interesting website where you can volunteer or fundraise for the organisation and book a speaker to come to schools or churches to talk to children about internet safety. They also provide training for teachers on how to spot the signs of grooming. You can also donate, which I think, if you're looking for a cause to support, this would be a perfect organisation because the whole focus of them is to protect children. And, as the stats say on the website, 99% of children went online in some form in 2021, and a third of children regularly play online games with strangers. I've signed up for a monthly donation, and there are various categories telling you what your donation can achieve. I have no affiliation with this foundation, and I'm just mentioning it genuinely because I think that organisations like this should be handed bags of money to continue their work, as it's clear not only that this foundation keeps Breck's memory alive, but his mother's sole focus now is to try and stop other mothers having to go through the agony that she had to go through. Breck, I'm sure, will be proud of her, and I sincerely hope that he is at peace.